The story begins as a hero steps in to save a little girl from being swarmed by a horde of goblins, and she can't help but admire his courage. Some years later, Laos the hero goes to the Adventurers Guild to take up a quest. When a lady asks him for a team-up, other adventurers in the guild are stunned by the girl's action. The girl offers to team up with Laos after seeing his sign asking for recruits to join his party. She introduces herself as Narcina, telling Laos she's a skilled martial artist, while Laos introduces himself and tells her he's a healer, but he still doubts his ability. Amherst, an employee of the guild, suddenly cuts into their conversation, asking Narcina if she knows Laost's identity. She informs her that Laost is an incompetent healer who only knows the most basic spells despite growing up as an adventurer. She informs Narcina that Laost is a loser because despite his years of being an adventurer he's yet to learn any advanced healing spells. She informs Narcina that Laost was recently kicked out of his previous party because he couldn't use a detoxification spell to save his party members. Everyone in the town knew about Laost's incompetence, giving them a reason to ignore his recruitment posters. Amherst tells Narcina she will run out of money if she teams up with Laost because he doesn't get paid since he can't complete quests as a healer. Narcina shows Amherst her purse, assuring her that she will be fine because she is well off. Amherst warns Narcina not to walk around with such a huge bag of money because most of the adventurers in the town are gangsters and they will prey on her. Narcina thanks Amherst for the advice, but Amherst offers to help her get into a beginner party after figuring out that she just started as an adventurer. Amherst asks for small handling fee to help Narcina mediate the process, but Narcina turns her down because she's set on teaming up with Laost. Amherst can't understand why Narcina is resolved to team up with Laost, but she obliges her request. She hands them a party application form, telling them to keep it handy so they can always refer to it in case of a dispute. While Laost is filling out the form, Narcina keeps admiring him, glad to have finally met her hero from the past. Laost asks her to write her name on the form and she gladly does so. After they fill out the form, Amherst demands the handling fee from Laost, who reluctantly takes out some money from his little coin pouch. Amherst gladly accepts the fee as Narcina is excited to be in the same party as her hero. They leave the guild as Laost goes over the details of the Mardat Labyrinth. No one has yet to explore its deepest parts, so there is no information about the kind of monster the master of the labyrinth is. Many adventurers were curious about the labyrinth, making the Mardat its largest city as they head to the labyrinth. Narcina wonders if they are qualified to explore it, since they newly formed parties. This recounts Amherst's warning, telling them they can only explore the grasslands of the west since Narcina is still a novice. Laost knew that Amherst's advice was reasonable because the monsters in the grasslands to the west were the weakest compared to the other locations around the city. It is a befitting place for beginners to start their adventuring, but Laost tells Narcina the grassland is so massive that monsters rarely appear. He tells her there are more monsters in the labyrinth, assuring her they won't be harmed so long as they don't venture too deeply into it. Laost's assurances convince Narcina. They arrive at the labyrinth entrance and are about to enter when Narcina cuts Laost off. She tells him she needs to take the lead because she's a martial artist and he's a healer. Laost agreed with her because she made a logical suggestion. Narcina leads the way and Laost follows behind her, marveling at her youthful enthusiasm. They enter the labyrinth, and though Laost is glad that Narcina is so motivated, he wonders if her combat skills match her enthusiasm. They suddenly encounter monsters in the labyrinth and Narcina immediately takes them down. She takes down the goblins so easily, trying to show off her strength to impress Laost, who commends her for being strong. Narcina gladly takes in his praises, glad to be useful to her hero. The monsters drop an item which Laost and show off to Narcina. He tells her adventurers make a living by selling monster drops like the magic stone to the guild. Narcina wonders why the magic stone is so valuable to the guild, and he tells her they make use of the magic which resides in the magic stone. Laost teases Narcina for knowing little about adventuring despite claiming to be an adventurer. Narcina confesses that she's not very good at studying because she would rather have a practical approach. They gather the magic stones together and Narcina wonders how much she can get from selling them, but Laost tells her they aren't worth much because they are drops from goblins. He tells her the only way to get more valuable stones is to defeat more powerful monsters in the labyrinth. Laost was content with the drops they had gotten because it was enough to pay the bills for that day. He asks Narcina if she wants to explore the labyrinth further and she enthusiastically answers, telling him she wants to go further. She promises to protect him in an emergency, assuring him that no harm will come to him. Her answer convinces Laost, so they keep exploring the labyrinth. They are walking down the labyrinth corridors when Laust suddenly pulls Narcina back. Narcina is so surprised that she wonders what happens, so Laust points at the labyrinth floor. He demonstrates that the floor was booby-trapped and Narcina is impressed. He figured out it was a trap. He points out that the color of the floor was different and Narcina tells him she didn't notice. She wonders how a healer was able to find a trap, which is supposed to be a thief's job, and Laust tells her it's from the experience he's gotten from working for a long time. They keep exploring the labyrinth and crouch down to avoid being seen when by a patrolling half-orc. Laust wonders why a mid-level monster is in the upper level of the labyrinth because it is unusual for them to appear there. Narcina suggests that they turn tail and run away since the monster outclasses them, but Laust assures her they stand a chance against it if they combine forces. Narcina agrees to battle the monster, so they come out to face it. Narcina rushes at the monster, who takes a swing at her, but she dodges. She jumps into the air and lands a kick on the monster, hurting her legs because the monster's skin feels like a brick wall. The monster raises its club to attack again and Narcina takes advantage of its slow movements. She dodges the monster's attack but gets distracted by some flying debris that scratches her. The monster attacks again and she blocks it just in time to avoid taking damage, but the monster corners her. The monster attacks, swings its club once again, certain it's going to get a guarantee hit, and Narcina accepts her defeat, but Laust steps in to save her. Laust defeats the monster with his sword, triggering memories of when he saved her several years ago. Narcina wonders if Laust is just a healer and tells her he has acquired many other skills because he has been an adventurer for a long time. Narcina is impressed by his variety of skills, but Laust suddenly notices that she's injured. Narcina tells him not to worry about it because it's a scratch that will heal in no time, but Laust tells her even the smallest scratches need proper treatment. He tends to her wound, healing it immediately. They go for the drop from the half-orc and Narcina is impressed by how much bigger the monster's magic stone is compared to that of the goblins. Laust is glad the magic stone will fetch a good price because it has a high magic content. He asks Narcina what she wants to do next, suggesting that they go back since they've gotten so many magic stones, but Narcina tells him she's still capable of fighting. They decide to keep hunting monsters while Narcina is still bursting with energy. After their exploration, they return to the guild with the magic stones and Amherst is surprised they defeated so many monsters in just half a day. She realizes that Laust took Narcina to the labyrinth instead of taking her to the grasslands as suggested. She scolds Laust for taking Narcina to the middle level of the labyrinth because it's the only way to get a half-orc magic stone, but Laust tells her they only explored the upper levels. Narcina backs him up, telling Amherst that Laust didn't let her explore the labyrinth further than the upper level despite insisting on it. Amherst is convinced that Laust is innocent, so she gladly accepts the magic stones and joyfully goes to the back to sort out their payment. Narcina wonders why Amherst is so happy in Laust, tells her the guild employees get a raise when they turn in the magic stones returned by the adventurers they are responsible for. Amherst sweet-talks Narcina into working harder to obtain more magic stones so they can always get a raise at the guild. She hands Laust their payment and Laust is surprised by how much they get from a single expedition. Laust still can't believe he gets so much money from the magic stones because the payment is 10 times what he has ever made. Even if he splits it in half and gives Narcina her share, it suddenly dawns on him that his former party ripped him off heavily. Amherst points this out to Narcina, who is furious, reminding Amherst that she was supposed to help settle monetary disputes between party members. Amherst tells her they can intervene if Laust pays the fee, but Laust decides to let things go because he now has a new party. He decides to forget the past and focus on his new party. They leave the guild, but Hansam, the guild master, walks out of his room and silently observes as they go. Amherst gleefully takes inventory of the magic stones in her possession when Hansam suddenly walks in on her. He asks her if she helped Laust find a new party and she tells him she can't sweet-talk anyone into teaming up with Laust because everyone knows he's a fraud. She informs him that Narcina decided to team up with Laust because she felt a special connection to him. Hansam gets a description of Narcina from Amherst and leaves her to her magic stones. Laust and Narcina walk into an inn and the waiter greets them. The waiter recognizes Narcina as Laust's new party member and Laust is surprised that news of his partnership with Narcina has already spread all over the city. The waiter tells him everyone was surprised that someone as incompetent as him was able to get a new party member. Laust shrugs off the blow to his reputation and makes a reservation for dinner and a room. Mary, the inn owner, asks them if they will be sharing a room and Narcina looks forward to sharing a room with Laust, but he dashes her hopes by making a reservation for 2 rooms. Mary serves them dinner before showing them to their room and Laust thanks her for her service. They go into their separate rooms after exchanging good nights, and Narcina slumps on her bed. Narcina recalls when Laust saved her when she was much younger. After Laust healed her wounds, Narcina swore to become an adventurer just like him and protect him in the future. From that day, she trained to become an adventurer, waiting for the day he would meet Laust again. She immediately traveled to the city after hearing that Laust had been kicked out of his previous party so she could form a party with him. She is content with how things turned out, and though she is happy that they were able to form a party and defeat monsters together, she is disappointed that Laust didn't recognize her. She figures out that Laust couldn't recognize her because her physical appearance has changed since she first met Laust some years prior. She realizes that Laust doesn't need her help because he has become much stronger than he was when they first met, which makes her sad. She snaps out of her misery and encourages herself to continue what she has decided to do. She renews her resolve to protect Laust whatever the cost. She didn't want to conclude that she came to the city for nothing, so she put her doubts behind her. She gets ready for bed, but something bothers her. She can't help but wonder why the townsfolk think Laust is so incompetent despite his overwhelming strength. The story continues. We see in the past when Laust was still part of Lightning Blade. The party was up against a Hydra and one party member has already been injured by it, so it was Laust's job to heal her while the party leader held off the monster. Unfortunately, while Laust was able to heal a physical injury, the woman was also poisoned, so she asked if Laust could deal with the poison as well. Laust apologizes and tells her he can't actually get rid of the poison, so the woman gets pissed because that means she has to recover by herself. The leader asked her to stop complaining and get back into the fight already because he can't keep the Hydra busy forever, but with the poison still in her system, the woman is in no condition to fight. The leader asks Laust to get her back in shape, but Laust says he can't do it and that they should have brought an antidote potion with them. The leader argues that he didn't buy one because antidotes are expensive and that's supposed to be Laust's job as a healer. Since Laust and Siberia aren't going to get much help for now, the leader turns to the mage and asks her to do something to help him because he can't handle the Hydra himself. So Armia tries using a flame spell, but it does absolutely nothing against the Hydra, so she gets scared and drops her staff. Margulis is given up on his party's incompetence, so he turns around and orders everyone to retreat immediately. Since Margulis gave up, Armia breaks down and runs away as well, followed by Laust and Siberia, who still can't walk, so Laust is helping her. However, as they are leaving, the Hydra key to close eye on Laust for some reason. Once they got back to the guild, Margulis took great joy in telling Laust that he was being kicked out of the Lightning Blade party, and he justifies his decision by saying it's Laust's fault that they couldn't defeat the Hydra, but Laust doesn't think he's the only one to blame since both Margulis and Siberia were so excited to battle a Hydra that they stayed up all night and went into the fight sleep deprived. The two of them refuse to accept any accountability for the failure, so they both look to Armia and tell her and decide who is at fault. Armia doesn't want to put the blame solely on Laust, but she also performed terribly during that battle, so she doesn't want Margulis targeting her instead for being useless, and thus she decides to throw Laust under the bus. Laust soon wakes up from his dream, and he realizes that he must still be bothered by what happened to him that day. Back before Laust during the Lightning Blade, he was already known as an idiot healer by everyone in town, although he still dreamed of becoming a first-rate adventurer. So when a party reached out to him with a position, Laust was overjoyed and jumped at the opportunity. However, once they were in a labyrinth, Laust soon found out that they hadn't hired him because they wanted a healer, they hired him because they wanted a human sacrifice and distract the monsters. Laust was tossed out and forced to run for his life, while his so-called party members at the time tried to walk past him without a care in the world, but all of a sudden, the monsters earned their attention away from Laust and began attacking the other party members instead, they into a total massacre. In the end, Laust was the only one who managed to survive, and while he knows it is normal for a weak commoner like him to be treated this way, he still wished that someone would acknowledge him as a real adventurer. Just then, as he was walking home, came across a carriage that had been attacked by some goblins, and normally he wouldn't care enough to put himself in danger by helping, but he saw how scared the little girl looked, so he threw caution to the wind and ran down to defend her, even though he was just a useless healer. He did his best to fight off the goblins, but he still sucked at combat back then, so in a matter of minutes, Laust got knocked out by a club to the back of the head. Laust fully expected to die that day, but he eventually wakes up and finds the little girl standing over him. He wonders how he could possibly still be alive, but then he looks over and notices that the Knight's Order had shown up and defeated all the goblins. He went through all the effort of trying to act heroic, but in the end, it looks like he's still an absolute idiot no matter what he does. However, despite the fact that he didn't do much, the girl still thanked him because his actions brought enough time for the knight's order to make it here, and she thought it was really cool the way he jumped in to save her. Laos notice is a scratch on the girl's arm, so if he raises his hand to heal her injury and she's thankful for it, but Laos doesn't think he deserves any praise because low heal is the only thing he can actually do. The girl looks confused, so Laos tells her all about his weakness and how he was just tricked into going into the labyrinth just so he could be used as bait, and she feels sorry that he had to go through such a thing. So she stands up and declares that she will become an adventurer in the future and form a party with him so she can protect Laos. Soon enough the girl left with the knight's order, and by now Laos have pieced together that she was the daughter of a noble family, so he never believed she would actually become an adventurer or that he would ever meet her again, but nevertheless her words gave him courage. So he decided to continue doing his best to become a proper adventurer. He went on a journey and soon found himself a mentor, so under their instruction he began his training arc, and worked tirelessly for countless hours to improve himself, and while as a healer he could still only use basic heal, he developed many other useful adventurer skills, so he was confident that he would no longer be a burden to anyone. And upon returning to pursue his adventurer dream, the first party join was Lightning Blade, but we all know how that turned out, don't we? Still Laos is grateful to that girl, because if she hadn't said those kind words to him that day, probably would have quit being an adventurer once and for all that day. But it's not like he will ever get the chance to meet her again, and there's no way she would have actually become an adventurer like she said she would. Just then, Narcina knocks on his door, so Laos goes to answer and she tells him she was thinking about going down to get some breakfast, so she wanted him to come with her, and he happily agrees. After breakfast, they head down into the labyrinth again, and this time they are going for some of the lower floors. As they enter, Narcina spots an inscription in the ground, and it looks like it's a teleportation circle, although she has never seen one in person before. Laos explains that you don't find teleportation circles in every labyrinth, and this one was probably put here by magicians soon after the labyrinth was discovered, although he doesn't have much information about it. Narcina asks if they can use this to teleport to different locations, and that's technically correct, but there still needs to be a teleportation circle on the other side to exit from. That sounds really convenient, so Narcina wishes there was a teleportation circle installed in the city, so they didn't have to walk all the way out here, but the knowledge used to create these circles was lost hundreds of years ago, so there's no way to make new ones. They both step onto the teleportation circle, and after a bright flash they appear on one of the lower floors. Laos tells Narcina that this is one of the mid-level floors, so the monsters here are going to be a lot stronger than the goblins she fought yesterday, and he wants her to be extra careful. Laos and Narcina begin fighting their way through the floor, but Narcina goes off on her own and tries to punch a lich, but Laos warns her against it. Liches are monsters made up of pure spirit energy, so physical attacks won't work on it. Laos suggests they fall back since they don't have anything that can damage the lich, but Narcina says she actually has a trick up her sleeve that she may be able to work against it. Laos decides to trust her, so the two of them face off against the lich, and Laos goes out in front to act as bait. He then starts running away, and as the lich chases after him, he runs past Narcina, who is preparing herself to take the lich down. All people possess a form of spirit energy within them called ki, and as a martial artist, Narcina has training enough that she's able to control the ki within her body and use it as a weapon by covering her fists with it. This way, when she goes to attack the lich, she punches a hole straight through it, and it soon disintegrates like any other monster and drops his magic stone. Laos runs over to check on her, and she seems perfectly fine, aside from the wounds she got on her arm. Laos tells her to stay still for a second because he wants to try something, so he pulls out a magic item that enhances the effects of healing spells, and uses it to heal Narcina's wounds. They head back to the guild together to show Amber the stones, and she is shocked that they managed to defeat a lich, but she is also excited for the commission she will get from this sale. Laos and Narcina get a lot more money than they were expecting, so they are in a really good mood and start heading back to the inn, but along the way, they run into a fight going on in the middle of the street. Things like this have been becoming more common over the years as more and more outlaws move into town to become adventurers, and they've been given all the honest adventures a bad name. It's a real mess, but there's nothing Laos or Narcina can do to change it, so Laos suggests that they should just enjoy their money and have a fancy dinner tonight. A little while later, Laos and Narcina are seated at their table and then serve one of Mary's best dishes to eat. While they eat, Narcina says she has a question she's been meaning to ask, so she points out to the giant stone pillar on the edge of town and asks what that thing is. At first she thought it was a building, but it has no windows or doors, and it doesn't look like a monument either, so it's really confusing. Laos shares her confusion and explains that he doesn't know what is either. He once got curious about it and asked one of the workers about it while it was still being constructed, but the workers didn't know what it was for, or who was paying to have it built. Narcina can't believe something like that was possible, but apparently an agent just showed up one day with some money and blueprints, so no one ever met the funder. Still, as strange as it may seem, Laos just chalks it up to some billionaire doing random shit, and he's perfectly fine with that since the towers aren't actually hurting anyone, but he also wishes some of that money could have gone towards building a wall for the city since it doesn't have one. Narcina agrees that a wall for the city would be nice, but at the same time she doesn't think there's much to worry about since with the number of adventurers that live in this city, whether it is monsters or thieves that attack, she's sure it'll be able to fight off any threats. After dinner, they both head back to their room, but before Laos goes to bed for the night, Narcina calls him back. She clearly has something to say, but she can't bring herself to see it, so she just tells him goodnight and heads to bed. Inside her room, she jumps on her bed and is upset because she wanted to tell Laos that she wants stay in the same room as him, but she couldn't come out and say it because it was too embarrassing. In the other room, Laos is lying in bed with his mind at ease now that he has such a great party member. He was able to continue adventuring thanks to that little girl's motivation, and while he doesn't know if he will ever get to meet her again, he has a lot to thank Narcina for. In other news, Margulis has just found a new member for the Lightning Blade party, and while he seems really excited to have Lyra join the team, Siberia doesn't seem to like her very much, and Armia is too shy to make direct eye contact. Anyway, now that the team is complete again, Margulis is eager to head out and finally defeat that Hydra once for all. The story continues. We see the Lightning Blade party heads back to the swamp to confront the Hydra, and luckily, the Hydra hasn't grown its head back yet, so they won't have to do as much work. Margulis quickly comes up with a plan of attack and says he and Lyra will attack from the front, Armia will provide magic support, and Siberia will seek out from behind. He's just about ready to run out into the action, but Lyra calls a timeout because there's no way she can be on the front line of an attack as a healer. Margulis is confused because Laos always fought on the front lines with them, and Lyra can't believe they were forcing their former to fight out on the front lines, but Laos never seemed to mind. In fact, Siberia recalls that Laos sometimes got some really good hits in, and he was actually the one who cut one of the Hydra's heads off. Lyra is in disbelief after hearing this, but Margulis doesn't expect her to do something like that. If she says she can't fight on the front lines, he's fine with that, but to make sure he asks her if she is capable of casting the detoxified spell to counter the Hydra's poison, and that's something she can actually do, so Margulis tells everyone to get into position to slay the Hydra today. Back in town, Laos and Narcina have just returned from their latest trip into the labyrinth, and Amherst is glad to see that they've brought more gems to sell to her, but she reminds Laos that he shouldn't push Narcina too far because she is still only a new adventurer, so Laos assures her that he's being very careful about the fights they get into. Amherst is glad to hear that they're being cautious, but there's still a limit to how much can be done with a party of two, so she suggests that Laos and Narcina should think about recruiting some new party members to make things easier for them. Laos agrees that more party members would make things easier, but ultimately, he decides that it isn't worth the hassle since he and Narcina are already making a lot of money as they are. Amherst admits that he's right, since with the amount they've been making recently, they could probably rent a house instead of staying in an inn if they wanted to. Narcina had no idea it was possible to rent a house in the city, so Amherst explains that there's a limit to the amount of equipment and items that you can store in an inn, but that's not an issue when you have a private room, although it's quite expensive, but the real value shines when there's a male and female party, so the extra privacy allows for a lot of late-night activity. Narcina suddenly seems really interested in renting a private house for some reason, but seeing as Laos did not react, Amherst doubts late-night activity is a possibility in this case. Speaking of private houses, Laos recalls that Lightning Blade had a private house as well, although they forced him to sleep in the storage closet, so it wasn't very comfortable for him. Amherst laughs how badly Laos was getting mistreated, but if it makes him feel better, she lets him know that he was actually pretty lucky to have been banished from Lightning Blade. Ever since he was kicked out, Margulis and the rest of Lightning Blade haven't been able to accomplish a single mission. Margulis can understand why, but Lyra can clearly tell that he's too dumb to realize he isn't strong enough to handle a Hydra head-on. Margulis hears her, so he's about to start yelling again, but Lyra tells him to be quiet, otherwise she can't concentrate on helping Armia recover. Armia was badly injured and poisoned, so Lyra really does need to concentrate, and while she's doing that, Siberia tells Margulis that as much as she hates to admit it, Laos may have been more valuable than they gave him credit for. Even though he stuck to healing, he was still able to get the job done in the end, and he also didn't notice that they were scamming him out of his money, so he was the perfect party member. Margulis is really wishing Laust hadn't quit, but Siberia reminds him that he was actually the one who kicked Laust out of the party, and he made a big show of it too. Margulis had totally forgotten all about that, but if he was the one who kicked Laust out, then he thinks it should be easy to get him back. All I have to do is ask, and he is sure Laust will rejoin the party immediately, because after all they're the famous Blades of Lightning, so no one would turn down an invitation to join the party, although Siberia is starting to question if she even wants to stay in the party at this point. By the next morning, Lyra is finally done healing Armia, so she wakes up and thanks her for the healing, but Lyra is just happy she could help. She asked if Armia feels well enough to eat, and since she does, Lyra heads downstairs to get some food for her, but when heads downstairs to ask where the food is stored, she realizes Siberia and Margulis are gone, and she has no idea where they went. Margulis and Siberia are currently the guild, and Margulis loudly proclaims that he is willing to graciously allow Laust to return to his party. Once again, everyone stops what they are doing and stares in disbelief, and Laust is most shocked of all, so he asks Margulis to repeat himself because there's no way he could actually said something so dumb. Margulis repeats himself and Laust's ears weren't deceiving him, but he still doesn't know how to respond or such a ridiculous request. At the same time, Narcina and Amherst see what's going on, and Amherst explains the blonde guy is the leader of the party that kicked Laust out, and now he's trying to get to come back by acting condescending. Laust obviously isn't amused with Margulis's speech, but before he can say anything, Margulis assumes he might be upset about the fact that they scammed him out of his pay while he was in their party, so Margulis apologizes and acts like it was an honest accident. He promises that Laust will get a fair share this time around, plus they could really use his help since the new healer Margulis hired isn't very useful in combat. Siberia thinks there's no way Laust will actually agree to Margulis' request, but to her shock, Laust actually thanks Margulis for the offer. Narcina refuses to let Laust be stolen from her, so she runs out in front of him and starts yelling at Margulis, saying Laust will never join his party again. Laust touches her shoulder and tells Narcina that she doesn't need to worry about him leaving, after which he turns to Margulis and tells him that he was only saying thanks to be polite, but he has no interest in ever joining his party again. Margulis can't believe he got turned down, and so if he starts getting desperate and accuses Narcina of trying to use Laust because she realized he is actually really useful to have around. All Margulis's aggressive pointing is starting to get on Laust's nerves, so he grabs Margulis' hand and warns him that if he ever does anything to hurt Narcina, Laust will make sure his body will be mangled beyond recognition. Laust then turns to leave, and Narcina pauses for a second to rub it in Margulis's face one last time. After they've left, Margulis doesn't know what to do, but he still wants to defeat the Hydra, so he yells at Amherst to recommend him a new adventurer for his party, preferably one who can handle fighting on the front lines alongside him, and Amherst really doesn't want to have to deal with him, but it looks like she won't have to because an adventurer walks out from the crowd. And this dude looks like he completed all the side quests before coming here. The mysterious man offers to join his party and asks if Margulis is satisfied with his level of strength. Margulis checks the guy out and he definitely looks strong, but to make sure, he's going to have to test his sword skills. He draws his sword and charges at the man, but with a simple swing of his sword, the man instantly disarms Margulis and makes him look stupid in front of the entire guild. After recovering from the embarrassment, Margulis says he will accept the man into his party. However, Siberia doesn't think it's a good idea to trust a man who wears a mask all the time, but Margulis says they have no choice, because if they don't defeat the Hydra, Lightning Blade reputation as a strong party will sink like a rock, so he walks out to the guy and asks for his name, so the guy tells in his name the Seek. Back at Laust and Narcina's inn, Narcina is checking herself in the mirror when she hears someone knocking on Laust's door, so she goes out to check who it is and finds Sheila at Laust's door. For some reason, her first thought is that Sheila is trying to make a move on Laust, but after thinking about it for a bit, she realizes that couldn't be possible. Once Laust finally opens the door, Sheila informs him that he has guests waiting for him downstairs, which is surprising, but Laust decides to go meet with them to see what this is about. Once he gets downstairs, Laust and Narcina meet with Armia and Lyra, and while Armia feels bad for coming at him with such a brazen request, she asks Laust if he could come and help them just this once. Margulis still intends to go after that Hydra and even hire a new warrior to help with the mission, but Lyra doesn't think it's going to be enough to win. For one thing, Margulis is still too stubborn to buy an antidote potion because it costs money, and he's never going to realize how reckless he's being until someone ends up dying because of him. Armia knows it's too late to apologize now, but she acknowledges how strong Laust is because if he hadn't cut off the Hydra's head last time they fought it, the entire party would have been wiped out. Laos still doesn't think he did all that much, but Lyra points out that the party struggled to survive against the Hydra that have lost 2 heads already, so they would have been dead meat if it was in perfect condition. Laos asks what exactly Armia is asking him to do, so Armia stands up and says she wants Laos to fight with them, because she's sure they can defeat the Hydra if he is there as well. She's basically asking him to rejoin Lightning Blade, but Laos already had this conversation with Margulis earlier today and his answer remains the same. Narcina wonders why Armia seems so determined to help Margulis out since this whole odd party must be horrible for her to deal with. And yes, Armia believes Margulis has a lot of flaws, and I mean a lot. Even so, he's still her party member. Narcina becomes angry after hearing this because Laos was her party member as well, but she did absolutely nothing to support him when he was being mistreated. Armia begins crying and apologizes for what she did to Laos, but at the time she was scared that if she didn't go along with what Margulis said she would be kicked out of the party as well. She's a new adventurer, so she doesn't know any other parties to go to, but she now realizes that what she did was wrong and that Margulis is wrong for the way he treated Laos. But even though she doesn't agree with Margulis's way of doing things, she still doesn't want him to get himself killed in an unwinnable battle. Lyra tells Laos that Armia is serious about her apology and she's been agonizing over it for a long time, so while she understands Laos can decline the request, she asks that he at least consider accepting Armia's apology. Laos gets up and tells Armia that he holds no grudge against her, so he will accept her apology, but he still has no intention of returning to Lightning Blade. Armia is disappointed, but she accepts his answer and says she won't bother him about it anymore. Just then, Mary comes over and she's brought a whole feast to cheer Armia up since she looks like she hasn't been eating well. While Armia is eating, Laos talks with Lyra and asks if there is any way for her to take Armia and leave Margulis' party, but if she could have done that she wouldn't have come here in the first place. Laos knows how Margulis treats people, so he suggests that Lyra should lead his party anyway, but Lyra refuses to do that since she would be leaving Armia to defend for herself under the leadership of that idiot. The next day, Margulis finally introduces Lyra to Sieg since they will be fighting the Hydra again today, but she seems to recognize him from somewhere, so she wants to have a word with him. She asked what he's doing here and why he is disguising himself, but Sieg is still trying to pretend that he has never met Lyra before, so he tries walking away, but as he does so she notices the sword on his back which used to belong to a person named Ronaldo, so she accuses him of stealing it, but Sieg denies it and says it was handed down to him as a gift, so he's no thief. He may have cleared his name of theft, but the fact that he admitted knowing Ronaldo lets Lyra know that he is indeed the same Sieg she knew. However, she decides to keep his secret identity hidden, since it seems important to him. Later on in the day, Laos and Narcina are heading into the labyrinth as they usually do, but he can't help but worry about Armia and the rest of Lightning Blade because he has no idea if they are truly ready for the battle or not. The story continues. We see Narcina tears through some works the same way you tear through a bag of Cheetos at 3 a.m. Our blue-haired bombshell of a heroine demonstrates exactly why she's the perfect partner by single-handedly dispatching the entire group of monsters with ease. Laos is impressed, but Narcina already eager for the next challenge. Unfortunately, Narcina lost her Ozempic prescription and she's hungry, so the next challenge ends up being lunch. The two find the perfect spot on the dirty dungeon floor, but instead of bringing some packed sandwiches, Narcina surprises Laos with a huge feast. It turns out that Betty Crocker forced them to take the leftovers from earlier, but somehow Laos didn't notice Narcina bringing the giant box of food. As they stuff their face holes, Laos explains what kind of monster his old teammates are up against. The Hydra is a truly terrible foe, with more muscles than a JoJo protagonist, and a body covered in scales strong enough to deflect both physical and magical attacks. As if being indestructible wasn't enough, it's also filled with protagonist-killing poison. These dragons are somewhat rare, but among other monsters of its caliber, it's the most common. Thanks to this, the Hydra has been studied extensively by past adventurers, and they have come up with a number of methods in order to deal with it. Its poison will have anyone spraying blood from both ends, like they just ate a Taco Bell taco filled with broken glass, but luckily there's an antidote available for purchase. It's rather expensive, however, which is why Laost's old broken team didn't have one before. Laos explains that his old team will have to rely entirely on their new healer's detoxifying magic. Narcina can't help but feel a little nervous hearing all this, but Laos soothes her fears when he describes the kind of people in his old team. Its leader Margulis may look like the free hero you get in mobile games, but he's actually a really exceptional swordsman. As long as he doesn't run for his life and doesn't underestimate his opponent, Margulis can be quite formidable. Laos also knows Siberia that she has top-notch speed and agility. Her talent for stealth could be enough to sneak up on any monster, even one with as many heads and eyes as the animators decided to slap onto this thing called a Hydra. Narcina doesn't like hearing Laust speak so highly of his old squad because they dropped him, the same way you guys drop an anime after the first filler episode. However, Laust says that the only language he knows is the truth, so Narcina keeps her opinions to herself now. Instead, she mentions how tired she's getting challenging the same dungeon day after day. Laust agrees that it might be time to move on, and Narcina excitedly brings up the wetlands that are not too far away. Meanwhile, in the wetlands not too far away, we join Lightning Sword. They're in the middle of fierce combat with the Hydra that looks like it was solely created to remind side characters that they're not main characters. Margulis manages to land a cutting blow against one of the many heads, and their latest member Sieg follows that up with a slash of his own that nearly decapitates the beast. Pressing his advantage, the masked swordsman readies another assault, but as his blade reaches the beast, he pulls back and retreats. Margulis angrily calls him out for not finishing the job, but Sieg counters by asking if Margulis would really be alright with him taking all the glory for himself. He believes that Margulis, the trophy man, deserves this trophy for himself. After all, Margulis the Hydra Slayer does have a better ring to it than all his other stupid nicknames. Eager for me to stop making fun of him, Margulis charges headlong at the monster, but he's quickly sent packing after his foolhardy attack. Lyra's busy treating their rogue, but she can't believe that their brain-routed leader is charging straight at the monster. He has no chance because the dragon's basically a walking tank with more blackheads than Siberia's back. Lyra continues to complain, but Siberia says that's just who he is. She likes bad boys and she finds his stupidity rather charming. With her injuries healed and her terrible choice in men, the rogue rushes back to make more poor life choices. Just then Lyra's attention shifts to Sieg, who seems to be merely observing from a distance, and she wonders what he's planning. The fight has dragged on for a while now, and the Hydra is beginning to slow down. Siberia's distractions allow Margulis to deal considerable damage, and in this world with no child labor laws, Armia is working overtime with their magical assault. With their powers combined, Lyra is confident that the Hydra will soon fall. Her hopes are shattered when the Hydra sends a huge rock into the chest of the little child labor who now wishes she was assembling Nikes like the other kids. Armia is terrified to see that the monster has now fixed its gaze on her. She lets out a blood-curdling scream as it draws close, and things take a dark turn as something strange begins to happen. A dark smoke-like substance begins emanating from her body that no one can identify until Sieg points out that it's fear. As it turns out, fear is exactly what monsters like to Hydra feed on to grow stronger. What's odd is that fear is not something usually visible to the naked eye like this. The team soon realizes that they have been surrounded by the smoke as it flows in from every direction. Lyra shocked to realize that what they are seeing is mana, something only found in the deepest parts of the labyrinth. Mana, fear, or whatever this mist is, the Hydra absorbs it hungrily and it begins to change. With enough magical power, monsters are capable of mutating something that can often increase their abilities and turn them into even more terrifying opponents. Unfortunately, instead of transforming into something truly creative, the low-budget anime studio just changed its color and throw on some more heads. Still, the beast is several times more powerful than it was before, and Lyra never imagined that she would see a transformation happen in real life. There is no way for Lightning Sword to beat this new and improved monster, so Sieg tells Lyra to take care of the mage and Margulis it is time to retreat. Margulis, the legendary Hydra Slayer, does not retreat however, he charges forth once more intent on taking at least one head as his prize, but as his blade makes contact with the Hydra scales, it cracks and snaps in two, completely failing him like the cheap gaming mouse you bought fails you right in the middle of a match. Left defenseless, Margulis nearly finds a new home at the back of the Hydra's throat, but Laust appears to save him just in time. Margulis is shocked to see his old teammate, but there isn't much time to talk. With Narcina's help, the two manage to drive back to Hydra, but Laust is needed somewhere else. Sieg points out that Laust is a mere healer and sends him off to go treat Armia while he holds the beast back. Lyra has used up all her side character points so she can no longer help their fallen mage. Luckily, Laust arrives with plenty of his plot armor tokens, so he uses his humble heal ability on Armia. Lyra exclaims that the basic heal spell won't nearly be enough, but she is stunned to see him use another, and then another heal on top of the. Lyra is confused and wonders if Laust is glitching out as he says heal a bunch of times, but Siberia explains that Laust is just doing what he always does by layering heals. Even the Golden Boy says that this is pretty common for Laust, but to Lyra, that makes no sense whatsoever. Putting a band-aid over an injury helps, but putting 10 band-aid on top of the first doesn't make the wound heal any faster. Fortunately, this not be known at all, it's proven quite wrong when Armia reawakens thanks to Laust. Lyra can only wonder just who Laust really is, and Armia thanks him for keeping her alive, so she won't be fired for leaving work early. Nearby, Sieg has done what he can to hold the Hydra, but it appears that the monster has been waiting for Laust. It's as if it remembers him and now wants revenge. Thankfully, Narcina and Sieg there to help as the three ready themselves for the dangerous fight ahead. The rest stand back and decide to watch from the sidelines while the real heroes go to work. The great Hydra Slayer has no complaints either, but only because his sword is broken, not because he's a coward. The intense fight begins as Narcina lands a stunning punch, and Laust capitalizes on the opening she provides. Meanwhile, Sieg's great sword cleaves a head clean off in a single stroke. Margulis is shocked to see that his blade didn't break, but Lyra explains that it's a magical sword. Margulis is stunned because he has heard of this legendary blade, and it's way better than his pathetic sword that his girlfriend always laughs at. Just then a costly mistake by Narcina sees one of her strikes countered by the Hydra, and she is thrown to the ground. Disturbingly, the monster doesn't attack, but instead seems to take her hostage and dares Laust to fight it one-on-one. Lyra comes in with more epic world building by explaining that monsters don't just get stronger when they mutate into slight variations of themselves, and they get smarter too. This monster now has more intelligence than one head than their entire party, and its heart is full of vengeance. Laust is no punk, so he tells everyone to stay back and he accepts the challenge. Laust dashes forward with the scene quickly cuts to a disappointed old man. When we return to the fight, we see the Laust has been defeated. Even though the dragon has 1,000,000 IQ points, it's still not above flexing on noobs, so it's taunt Laust with a battle cry. Laust just hopes that the dragon won't start teabagging him, and he reaches out to his loyal teammate before losing consciousness. The others tremble in fear as they're out of options, but Laust's body begins to pulse. Everyone is shocked as our hero finds the strength to rise again, this time burning with the terrible aura. It turns out that the mysterious old man was not disappointed by Laust's weakness, he was disappointed that the power inside Laust that should have remained in eternal slumber has now awakened. Just then a glowing horn spots from Laust's forehead, as he's infused with the sudden burst of power. The dragon instantly senses the danger, so it moves in to end the fight quickly, but it's too late. With one fell swoop, Laust destroys the Hydra, cutting it down to size before he himself collapses unconscious. When our favorite OP healer awakens, he finds a very worried Narcina leaning over him. Thankfully, Lyra was there to heal him back to health, but she reminded him that such magic doesn't grow on trees, and she'll be sending him her bill later, and it might hurt more than the Hydra. She asked what all that horny business was earlier, but Laust has no clue what she's talking about. Regardless, Laust's old teammates change their attitudes faster than you change clothes after realizing you haven't showered for a week. Margulis is delighted to realize that his good buddy Laust is so strong, and he's convinced that with him at their side, they could even beat the master of the labyrinth himself. Siberia reminds him that no one has even seen the master and says that they should slow down a bit. For the time being, they can sell all the magical stones they gathered after defeating the Hydra. Such a haul split between the three of them is enough to make them all quite rich. Laust points out that more than 3 people helped, but that's not how the lightning sword operates. Margulis deems that the 2 newbies on the team hardly did enough to earn a share, and he thinks that it's simply Laust's trophy waifu. Margulis then declares that he, Siberia and Laust can claim the prize for themselves, and even poor Armia isn't included because child labor is cheap anyway. The evil Margulis even goes as far as to suggest that Armia might never wake up, so they might as well just sell her for some extra coin, considering how useless she is as a mage. Narcina quickly fed up with this dark turn of events, so she knocks Margulis off his feet with one solid punch. The fallen trophy case starts whining that guild members are forbidden from fighting each other, and he demands that others testify against Narcina. Naturally, the people he just pissed off didn't see a thing and they have nothing to testify to. Luckily for him, his partner in crime is there to back him up, and she says that should let the guild know that they're collaborating to break the law. Sieg has a change of heart and says that he might have seen something after all. However, much to Margulis' chagrin, he reveals that what he saw was someone trying to human traffic a young girl. Lyra agrees some pervert definitely tried to sell an unconscious person off, an evil felony that demands punishment, even in a fictional anime world. Sieg says that he can't let this go, and Margulis is shocked when he hints at what his real identity is. Afterwards, Margulis and Siberia get their just desserts and are tied up, like you or when you're watching anime and your friends want to hang out. Sieg takes off his tiny mask that hides absolutely nothing to reveal his true identity. His real name is Zyge, an absolute shocker by the animators. It turns out that he's an adventurer from the Royal Adventurers Guild, which is a pretty big deal. He explains it as part of the Royal Guild. He's there to police other adventurers and to safeguard the town, a job usually meant for local adventurers who have been lacking as of late. When he first arrived to investigate, he immediately ran into Lightning Sword and has been closely watching them ever since behind his perfect disguise. Zyge was completely unrecognizable behind the mask and he witnessed a lot, so it's no surprise that Margulis and Siberia are judged to be unfit for the guild and will be expelled from the association. The two are likely to end up serving a lifetime of forced labor, mopping up baby oil after every ditty party. Their wailing and whining begin, but the two are ignored as Laust says to speak with Zyge in private. Amazingly, he asks that his old teammates be spared for some reason. Laust explains that once those two were good adventurers with dreams and aspirations, but were corrupted by the idea of being the very best. They may crave wealth and social status, but they aren't truly evil, just misguided and lost. Laust's speech works way better than mine does when trying to get out of a speeding ticket, so Zyge agrees and releases the two of them. However, he makes sure that they understand that he might always be watching, and they will never know it because he will be wearing his mask again. The lucky pair doesn't need any more convincing and quickly run off, hopefully right out of this story for good. Zyge explains that even if they had been expelled, they would only go on being their devious selves, trying to human traffic anyone they came across. This way, as adventurers, the guild can keep an eye on them. However, Amherst isn't so sure about that. Keeping tabs on those two might have been easy in the capital city, where high-level adventurers hide their identity using sophisticated disguises, but this is just a small town and they don't have those kinds of resources. Zyge agrees and suggests that he stay a while to make sure that things stay on the level around here. With all that said and done, Narcina isn't feeling the best about what just happened. She regrets convincing Laust to help his former teammates, but Laust isn't worried. He may still have feelings for his team, but he feels good about the way things ended and has no regrets. He actually thanks Narcina and asks her to keep being his partner, to which he happily accepts. That night, Zyge and Lyra discuss his true mission. As Zig explains it, he's here to investigate the town in light of all the mutations going on, like the Hydra they just brought down. It turns out that he used another disguise on top of his old one to hide from even the higher-ups. It was a mustache and practically wiped his existence off the face of the earth. With the information he gathered, he thinks that the Adventurers Guild is directly responsible for the mutations, and he even suspects that the boss in charge might be behind it all. He asks Lyra to help him and to form a party together like they did in the old days. Lyra, while hesitant, agrees on one condition: Armia the mage has to join the party too. Zyge welcomes a new addition and says that he's going to need all the help he can get, especially now that he has witnessed the kind of monster-like strength Laust displayed in their fight. Someone like Laust demands all of their attention. The story continues. We see the next day, Sieg and the others meet up with Laust and Narcina for breakfast, and they tell them about their decision to form a party together. Narcina is surprised to hear this, but their party composition is pretty balanced since they have a warrior, a healer, and a mage. Narcina asks Armia if she's alright with this arrangement, and Armia is more than satisfied because she would have had nowhere to go. Sieg and Lyra hadn't taken her in, so she feels deeply indebted to them for it. After breakfast, Narcina asks Laust what he wants to do today, and surprisingly Laust says the first thing he wants to do is head to the guild. Normally they wouldn't head there so early in the day, but with all the commotion yesterday, he forgot to exchange the Hydra magic gem for money, so he wants to get that done now. But the gem isn't the only reason he wants to go. He has been thinking about taking on a quest from the guild, since it's a way they could make money aside from selling magic gems. Narcina knows quests involve accepting jobs to do things like defeat monsters, find special items, or act as bodyguards for a group, and in exchange for the service the guild will pay them money, but she has never considered taking the quest herself before. However, Laust tells her that if she wants to continue doing well as an adventurer, then she's going to have to gain some experience with completing quests alongside fighting monsters. Narcina has touched that Laust is thinking about her so much, but when Laust notices that she's gone quiet, he asks her if something is wrong, and his face is a little too close to hers, so she's all embarrassed and tries to change the subject. A little while later they finally arrived at the guild, but it seems like all eyes are on them for some reason. Narcina wonders why the atmosphere here seems so hostile, but then Laust overhears some of the adventurers gossiping about how he single-handedly slayed the Hydra, and he now understands what's going on. He pulls Narcina aside to warn her that they are going to need to be careful from now on since the others in the guild have learned about their fight with the Hydra, and there may be some people here who will try to steal the Hydra magic stone from them since it's really valuable. Just then Laust and Narcina are approached from behind by a group of adventurers, and Laust recognizes the leader as Marnell. Marnell says he wants to have a little chat with Laust, but Laust is hesitant to agree since it looks like Marnell is trying to jump him. Marnell realizes there has been a misunderstanding here, so he tells his guys they are making Laust nervous so they should go wait outside for a minute. Marnell apologized for coming to him with such a large group, but when his guys heard that Laust the Ignoramus defeated a Hydra single-handedly, they all got curious and wanted to ask him about it. But before any of that, Marnell wants to sincerely apologize a lot for not helping him out when he needed it. Everyone in the guild knew that Margulis was mistreating Laust, yet none of them did anything to fix the situation. They all just looked the other way and ignored Laust's issues because they didn't want to have to deal with Margulis, and worse yet, they all mocked him behind his back, so they were just as bad as Margulis. While Marnell may not have done anything to Laust directly, he knows the way he ignored Laust was terrible, so he hopes Laust can forgive him, but Narcina cuts him off and says his apology is not accepted. Laust had to endure years of torment and mockery from everyone in this guild, so if they want forgiveness, Narcina says they all have to get on their hands and knees and beg for 3 days straight. Laust pleads with Narcina not to take things too far because if she actually forces him to do that, then everyone is going to think Laust is the bad guy here. Besides, even if he may have defeated the Hydra, Laust is still an inadequate healer who can only use one heal spell, so he doesn't think they were wrong when they called him an ignoramus. Laust clearly hasn't learned anything about self-respect because he tells Marnell it's okay for people to keep calling him Laust the Ignoramus, and extends his hand for a handshake to show that he has no hard feelings about it. Marnell shakes Laust's hand and tells him that if he ever finds himself in trouble, then he and his party will do whatever they can to help. Now that that's over, Laust and Narcina finally take the Hydra gem to Amherst so she can appraise it, but Amherst is left in utter disbelief because this is the most unique magic stone she has seen in a long time. The Hydra's mutation caused a drastic change in the composition of the stone, so now she says it might be worth well over 10 times the original price. Monster mutations don't happen often, so any mutated stone would be worth a lot on its own, but this one is from a Hydra, so it's especially rare. The fact that the Hydra mutated in the wetlands is also a problem though, since monster mutations require an enormous amount of mana, and the wetlands normally don't have enough mana to facilitate yet. It's possible for mana accumulate outside the labyrinth, but it's unlikely for that to happen naturally, and there's also the fact that Laust and Narcina encountered a high-level orc on the upper floors of the labyrinth, so there's definitely something going on in there. Narcina asked why the guild hasn't done something about this, like send an expedition out to investigate the cause of these strange occurrences, and that's a good question, so it's Hansam, the branch manager, happens to be walking by. Laust and Narcina decide to report the matter to him. In Hansam's office, Laust and Narcina give detailed accounts of the high-level monsters on low-level floors and the Hydra mutating outside the labyrinth, but Hansam doesn't seem to care. Laust tries to convince him that this is a serious issue, since if they don't find out why monsters have been getting stronger lately, then other adventurers might end up getting hurt. But once again, Hansam says he doesn't have time to deal with such a trivial matter, and if adventurers end up dying because of something like this, then they were probably better off dead anyway. Laust sees that Hansam has no intention of investigating the events, but even if he's not going to do anything about it, Laust suggests that he should at least post a warning to let people know of the new dangers, but Hansam seems at a personal grudge against Laust, so instead he warns Laust to either stop complaining or to get out of this town. They aren't getting anywhere Hansam, so they leave his office, and Narcina is really pissed at him for what he said. Laust tries to calm her down and says Hansam is probably too busy to deal with the issue, but that's not why Narcina is angry. She's angry because of the way Hansam treated Laust, because there was no reason for him to be so hostile, but Amherst tells her that that's just the way Hansam, the master of this guild, Mist, is an old and reclusive person, so they almost never leave their office. That's why Hansam has been left in charge of running the guild, and though he may not be the best person, he gets the job done, so there aren't many complaints about him. The only problem is that he expects everyone to be perfect, so he would constantly berate people for even the slightest mistakes, and that really gets on her nerves. That aside, Laust says she has a favorite ask of Amherst since he was hoping to pick up a quest with Narcina. Amherst is more than happy to help, so she brings out a list of all the quests that are available at the moment and allows Laust to look through it. The quests all seem to be pretty mundane, especially this one about a guy looking for a fishing buddy in the labyrinth, so Narcina is really disappointed. Amherst understands that Narcina thinks it's a bit lame, but she would still be getting paid for it, so it's an official job and she shouldn't look down on it. While Laust is looking for the rest of the list, he notices a quest which involves defeating a monster, and Narcina seems to be a lot more excited about this one, since it sounds like it will be action-packed. She says she's interested in taking this quest, but Amherst is a little hesitant to let her have it since it's not exactly a good fit for their party. The quest is to eliminate a phoenix that lives near one of the mid-4 teleportation circles, and if they manage to pull it off it would earn them a lot of money, but a party consisting only of a healer and a martial artist won't stand a chance against that kind of monster. Laust agrees with Amherst on this since it would be practically impossible to defeat a flying phoenix when they don't have a long-ranged attacker. Amherst says she would only allow them to accept the quest if they had a warrior and a mage, as well as another healer to use area heal to help everyone recover. Laust thinks about it for a second, and he just so happens to know party with a warrior, a mage, and a healer that could help with this quest. A little while later Laust meets Sieg and the others to discuss the Phoenix subjugation mission, and both Lyra and Sieg seem to be on board with the mission, especially since it would make it easier for Sieg to keep an eye on Laust. Before they agree anything though, Lyra asks Armia if she's willing to partake in the mission, and Armia says she doesn't mind, but she asks Laust if he's sure he wants her to be a part of the group after the way she treated him. Laust says he's not mad at her for what she did, and as long as she acknowledges that the way she acted was wrong, he feels like he can trust her to do better in the future. Now that they've agreed to work together, they need to begin preparing for the mission, so everyone heads to the market and starts shopping for the gear they will need. After shopping for a while, Laust tells Narcina that he wants to stop by a medicine shop so he can get a few medicinal creams because burn wounds heal a lot faster if you use medicine on them, in addition to healing magic. Narcina is amazed by how much Laust knows about being an adventurer, but because he's so knowledgeable, Narcina almost never gets a chance to make herself useful, and she's worried that Laust might not need her around anymore. While Narcina was in deep thought, someone sneaks up from behind and grabs her, so Narcina instinctively reacts and tries to punch her attacker, but the attacker seems far more skilled than Narcina anticipated as she effortlessly dodges the punch and jumps backwards. Once Narcina gets a good look at her, she realizes that she actually recognizes the attacker. The woman's name is Ralma, otherwise known as the Fire Goddess Adventurer, and she's pretty close with Narcina's father, so she was sent here to check on Narcina since she pretty much ran away from home to come here. She assumes the reason Narcina ran away from home as the man behind her, but now that she gets a good look at him she recognizes Laust, and Laust seemed to recognize her as well. They all head to a restaurant so they can talk, and Laust explains to Narcina that he was once Ralma's student, although it was just for a short time, and Ralma thinks of him as a terrible student. She points her fork at Laust and tells him that she wants to discuss something with Narcina that directly involves her family, so she wants them to leave the table, but Laust stands his ground and tells her he won't be leaving. He's in a party with Narcina, so her problems are his problems too, and he's concerned that Ralma might try to drag Narcina back home against her will if he's not here. Ralma finds it amusing that Laust thinks he could stop her if she wanted to take Narcina, but Laust is more than willing to try if Ralma pushes the issue. Ralma tries to scare Laust by conjuring up a small firewall and launching it at him, but Laust is unfazed and easily evades it, so Ralma agrees to let him stay since he seems a lot more capable than he was the last time she saw him. Before they start discussing anything though, Narcina wants to make it clear that she didn't actually run away from home. Sure may have forgotten to tell her parents she was leaving, but she did leave a note saying she was leaving to go be with a man who was almost 10 years older than her. After hearing all that, both Laust and Ralma are shocked, and Laust is starting to understand why Narcina's parents would be so worried. Ralma assures them that Narcina's parents aren't against her becoming an adventurer, they just wanted Ralma to make sure that Narcina wasn't in any kind of danger here, and seeing as she is with Laust, Ralma is sure Narcina will be perfectly safe, so there's no reason for her to get involved any further. Ralma lets the two of them go on with their shopping, and she's glad she makes sure Narcina is alright, but that wasn't the only reason she came to this town. Her main mission is to figure out what the Guildmaster Mist is plotting, because there's definitely something sinister going on in this town. The story continues. We see our group makes their way into the labyrinth with the teleportation circle, and Narcina is on guard the second they come out. But to her surprise, the Phoenix is nowhere to be seen. She thought they would have to fight it as soon as they got here, but Laust tells her the Phoenix wouldn't fit in here. Phoenixes aren't necessarily giant monsters, but the passageway it's too small for any phoenix to crawl through. So the group is going to head a little deeper into the labyrinth to find it. Monsters with wings don't like cramped spaces like these, but the group eventually comes across a wide open area which looks exactly like a phoenix of preferred habitat. According to the info Lyra got about this place is apparently newly discovered, meaning there is a lot of unexplored paths and unclaimed treasure to be found in both Narcina and Armia are excited to hear that, but there's one problem. The Phoenix is in the way of the unexplored territory, so no adventurers have been able to go in, which is why the guild put out a bounty on it. Laust examines the area and finds some scorch marks on one of the broken pillars, so now that he has confirmation that the Phoenix was indeed here, he throws a rock out into the room to make noise and lure the Phoenix to his location. Before long, the Phoenix makes an appearance in all its blazing glory, and the group is ready to take it on. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Amherst is sitting at her desk, bored out of her mind, when all of a sudden Ralma walks in. Amherst is immediately intrigued and rushes up to Ralma to be the first to greet her. Ralma is surprised by how nice Amherst is being considering the fact that she's a guild staff member, and she's right to be skeptical since Amherst is usually anything but nice when it comes to adventures. But after one look at Ralma, Amherst could tell that she's no ordinary adventurer. Amherst has no idea of who Ralma is or what her title may be, but with all the expensive magic items Ralma is wearing, Amherst is sure she must be rich. She asks how she can help Ralma, so Ralma tells her she wants to meet with the guild branch president. Amherst is a bit taken aback since the branch president never accepts visitors, so she asks if Ralma has some sort of appointment, but Ralma never made one. Amherst then asks if Ralma happens to be a friend of the branch president, but Ralma denies that although she does have a relationship with the branch president, but it's more like she wants to kill him. After Ralma says this, Amherst says she can't help since Ralma just admitted to trying it to the branch president. Her nice act also disappears as she starts calling Ralma an idiot, but Ralma doesn't have time to deal with this, so she decides to just commit arson and get it over with already. Amherst runs away and Ralma starts aiming for the branch president's office, but before she fires her shot, Hansam walks up behind her and stops her. He tells Ralma that she can talk to him if she needs anything, and he also informs Amherst that Ralma is known as the fire god, and if she wanted to, she could turn everyone in this building to ash, so Amherst better leave before she makes Ralma mad again. Back in the labyrinth, the Phoenix hasn't come down at all, so neither the swordsman nor Narcina are going to be able to attack it. With how things are going, Laust wishes he had brought a bow instead of the sword, but Narcina thinks they should be fine since it's not like the Phoenix can attack them from way up there. She was wrong, the Phoenix totally can attack from that distance, and it aimed its fireball straight at Narcina, so Laust had to jump in to save her. After he gets her to safety, he explains that while the Phoenix also attacks with its claws and fiery body, it can also launch long-distance fireballs, which makes it tricky to handle. Back of the guild, Ralma speaks with Hansam in his office, and before they start, he asks her if her complaint is about the situation in the labyrinth as well. Ralma is surprised that he would mention that, so Hansam explains that he just had a couple of adventurers complain to him about the dangerous conditions within the labyrinth. Ralma asks how he responded to their complaint, but all Hansam did was tell the adventurer to leave town if he doesn't like the working conditions. That doesn't seem fair, but that's beside the point because Ralma has a different complaint to make. She has noticed that there are a lot of thugs in the city acting as adventurers, and she believes the guild is intentionally bringing them here. Hansam is stone-faced and denies her claim. That's not the only thing Ralma wanted to talk about. There's also the matter of that giant pillar on the edge of the city, and the others like it all over town because she has a bad feeling about them. Hansam denies knowing anything about that, but Ralma accuses him of lying because for adventurer towns like these, the guild branch president is basically the king, so there's no way that Hansam would be acting guild president and not have any idea about what those towers are. Hansam asks her if she's got any proof of her claims because if not, she should just leave if she doesn't like the situation here. That's another reason Ralma is suspicious because not only did the guild bring those borderline criminals as adventurers, all the decent adventurers who complain about the guild actions are told to leave the town. Ralma is just speculating here, but she thinks the guild might be planning something that involves sacrificing a bunch of adventurers in this town, so they are filling with criminals who no one would miss, and telling all the decent people to leave instead, and that sounds a lot like someone is planning a labyrinth rampage. Down in the labyrinth, the group is still having trouble dealing with the Phoenix and its fireballs. So far, none of them have been hit. But with all this fires, sooner or later all the oxygen in the room is going to be burned up, and they won't be able to stay any longer if that happens. Right now the Phoenix is just trying to drive them out to protect his territory, since it knows it can't beat the 5 of them in a fight, and that means they can escape if they need to, but they are here on a quest to take this thing down, so they got no choice but to fight it. Zyge asks Armia if she knows how to use water magic, and it's not her specialty, but she says she can cast a water area attack. Even if she can't completely wipe out the Phoenix, if she can at least take out a bunch of its feathers, then it should be enough to bring the monster to the ground and allow Zyge to finish it off. There's still a bit of a problem since it will take Armia while to cast her spell. But until then, Zyge promises that he will make sure she's unharmed. Laust and Narcina are also going to be there to help, so she can rest assured that the plan will work. Armia agrees to do it, so everyone charges forward and begins drawing the Phoenix's attention. While they have it distracted, Lyra tells Armia to get ready, so she begins casting her spell and forms a water arrow. Once she is done casting, she fires it at the Phoenix and the spell takes out one of the monster's wings, so it falls into Zyge's range of attack. Once the opportunity is presented, Zyge draws his sword and stabs into the Phoenix's chest, but the cut was too shallow to be fatal, so the Phoenix is able to fly back up and perch on a nearby pillar. It may not have been able to take it down with that strike, but the wound Zyge inflicted has done a considerable amount of damage to the Phoenix, so if they keep up this pace, it should be able to defeat it. Back at the guild, Hansam tries to dismiss Ralma's claim that a labyrinth rampage will occur, but given the recent events that have taken place in this town, she believes is more than likely to happen. The most concerning indicator is the incident with the Hydra evolving outside the labyrinth, and as much as Hansam has been trying to ignore the problems that have been arising, he can't deny that the ambient mana levels in this area have been insanely high recently. In fact, while that conversation was going on, the Phoenix Dawn in the labyrinth began taking advantage of the high mana levels and started evolving. Laust's group sees this, but by the time they realize what's going on, it's too late to stop it because the Phoenix has already transformed and is now glowing bright blue. Narcina is confused because Laust's polar evolutions are supposed to be rare, and Laust is just as confused as she is because 2 high-level evolutions happening in the span of a few days is completely unheard of. Armia starts freaking out after the monster evolves, and if she ends up passing out in fear like last time, since monsters feed on fear, she's basically going to become a power plant for the Phoenix. On top of that, if Armia isn't able to overcome her fear on her own, then she's always going to be a useless adventure. The Phoenix catches a whiff of Armia's fear and immediately locks in on her, spitting an extra large fireball in her direction. There's plenty of time to dodge, so Lyra yells for Armia to run, but Armia is frozen stiff by fear. So Lyra is forced to run up and drag her out of the way, but they aren't going to be able to get out of the way in time. At the last second, before the two could become charcoal, Zyge jumps in and slashes the fireball in two. He made a promise that he would not let Armia be hurt, and no matter what he's going to keep his word, so he pleads with Armia to get back on her feet and fight with them. Hearing this, Armia finally snaps out of it and realizes that her friends are going to die if she doesn't get her act together. So she stands and apologizes to them and she's ready to cast her spell, but she's going to need them to buy her some time. Narcina is the first to run out and attack the Phoenix since it's within her strike range, but even though she had a clean hit off on it, the Phoenix took no damage and Narcina's fist catches on fire. Luckily, it was just her glove that was on fire, but now she's starting to reconsider the viability of boxing the Firebird. The Phoenix comes back for round 2 and Narcina has no way of defending herself, so Laust jumps in and blocks its attack with his sword. Unfortunately, the Phoenix's flames are insanely hot, so while he manages to save Narcina from getting burned by using his sword, he no longer has a sword to use. Thankfully, while Narcina and Laust were engaged with the Phoenix, Armia had enough time to finish casting her next spell. And while it's difficult to perform 2 attacks spells in a row, she managed to successfully fire a massive ice arrow of the Phoenix and take out one of its wings. Zyge then runs out in an attempt to finish off the Phoenix, but the last second, it starts flying again and Armia doesn't have enough energy to fire another spell, so it looks like they might be screwed. But just then, Narcina comes up with an idea and starts climbing up using some broken pillars until she's above the Phoenix, and now that she has the high ground, she uses a spirit kick to knock the Phoenix back to the ground. And the second she does, Laust shows up and uses his dagger to finish it off. After the Phoenix disappears, everyone begins congratulating Armia for doing such a good job, since they never could have defeated the Phoenix without her attack magic. Armia is so glad that she finally made herself useful, that she breaks out in tears and thanks everyone for their support. While Armia goes to pick up the magic crystal, Zyge and Lyra talk to one another and they comment on how Laust didn't end up transforming like he did last time. They have no idea what happened to him back then, but until Zyge can figure out what's going on with him, he will have to keep a close eye on Laust. The group returns to the inn after that, and Ralma is already there waiting for them. She congratulates Laust for successfully taking down the Phoenix and Laust appreciates it, but he wonders how Ralma could have possibly known about that. Ralma mentions that she met this particular guild receptionist earlier today, and she told Ralma everything about Laust's mission in exchange for some money. Since Laust and the others came back alone, Ralma assumed they must have succeeded, and that means they will get a lot of money from it, so she asks Laust to treat her to dinner. Laust ends up agreeing he knows Ralma can't handle her alcohol, so he asked her to hold back, but she's not going to listen to him. Once the food arrives, Narcina tells Ralma that the food here is wonderful, but Ralma says she prefers the food they serve back at the mansion. Armia is confused when Ralma mentions a mansion, so since none of the others seem to know about Narcina's family, Ralma explains that Narcina is the daughter of Earl Annalus Rocha. This shocks everyone, but is especially shocking to Laust because he finally realizes that the girl he saved all those years ago was really Narcina. Later that day, Han Sam goes to meet with the guild branch president in his office and informs him that there was yet another mutation. But he also has other news to report, so he tells the branch president that Ralma is in town, and this pleases the president since having his disciple around is going to be helpful. The story continues. We see Laust and Narcina are in the guild to exchange the Phoenix magic gem for money, but when Amherst brings out their payment, Narcina is outraged because it looks way too small. Phoenix gems are meant to be really valuable, and on top of that, this particular Phoenix was evolved, so it should be worth a whole lot more than usual, so Amherst must be trying to scam them if she says this is the only money we'll receive. Now, Amherst may be a money-hungry opportunist, but she's no thief, so she assures Narcina that the money in that pouch is large enough to cover the value of the Phoenix gem and encourages her to take a look for herself. Normally the guild pays adventurers in silver coins, but it would take hundreds of thousands of silver coins to pay for the gem, so Amherst opted to exchange everything for gold coins instead to make it easier to carry. Narcina is stunned once she sees that Amherst was telling the truth, and she doesn't really know what to say at this point, so Laust just tells her to accept the coins already and pays Amherst her fee, before walking off without another word. Amherst is always happy to receive money, but she noticed that Laust seemed a lot more quiet than he usually is. So she asked Narcina if anything happened between the two of them. Narcina follows Laust outside and the two of them sit down to have a snack, but Laust still isn't saying anything, so Narcina is forced to break the silence, and says there's something she's been meaning to ask Laust about. Since they just got paid a large sum of money, she asked if he would like to rent a detached house with her. Laust has taken aback by such a sudden request, but Narcina has a good reason for it. With the funds they currently have available, it is much more economical and secure to rent a private house rather than continuously staying in a hotel. And Narcina already went through the trouble of assessing the current housing market, and not only do they have enough money to rent a house, they could even buy one if they wanted. Something I can't relate to. Laust agrees with everything Narcina has said, but he asks if there is a particular reason she's bringing this up now, like some kind of complaint about Mary's hotel or something. But Narcina says there's nothing inherently wrong with the hotel, it's comfortable and has great food which makes it extremely popular, but precisely because it's so popular, this place is always crowded and Narcina won't admit it, but she really wants to have a place where she can have nice long chats with Laust without any interruptions, and then from there, maybe they will grow close enough to have a more physical connection. Narcina starts getting embarrassed by her unholy thoughts and Laust has no idea what she's thinking, but he tells her that it's still too early for them to buy a house together. He believes it's better if they save their money in case of a future emergency, and besides, they still have to consider this situation with the others. After they got back from the Phoenix hunt, Sieg suggested that they should all form a permanent party together since they work together really well. And although Laust hasn't given him an answer yet, he is seriously considering it as an option. If they plan to go into the deeper floors of the labyrinth eventually, then Laust and Narcina are going to have a difficult time making it on their own. That's why Laust wants to add new members to the team, and he's specifically talking about Sieg, because he is clearly a very strong adventurer. Narcina doesn't want to have to share Laust's attention, but she can't deny that he is right about needing strong teammates, so she ends up agreeing to form a party with Sieg and the others. Later that day, Laust and Narcina meet up with the others and agreed to merge parties with them, so Sieg proposed a toast to celebrate their new party. Mary overhears this and decides to treat everyone to a special meal, and after they are all done eating, Armia is pretty much in a food coma. Since it's getting pretty late, Lyra decides to take Armia to bed, so she picks her up and starts dragging her upstairs. Lyra continues walking to the stairs with Armia, but as she's about to head up, Narcina comes up to her and says there's something she wants to talk to her about. They head up together, and after getting Armia into bed, Narcina tells Lyra about the conversation she had with Laust earlier about buying a house together. Lyra is impressed by how bold Narcina was to ask Laust to live with her, but Narcina says Laust rejected her idea, so she's starting to think he might hate her. Lyra assures Narcina that Laust doesn't hate her, and it's much more likely that he just doesn't want to rush into things because he cares about her so much. Laust doesn't seem like the kind of person to be shy about this kind of stuff, but every man has their own personality, so Lyra advises Narcina to be patient with him. Narcina thanks Lyra for the good advice, and says she's glad she came to Lyra for help because she knew Lyra would have good relationship advice to give. But all Narcina prays just reminds Lyra the fact that she has never had a boyfriend. While Lyra and Narcina were talking upstairs, Laust and Sieg were having a conversation on the same topic, and Sieg thinks Laust should just agree to live with Narcina. It's not like they are getting married or anything, and Narcina clearly admires him a lot, so it would hurt her feelings if he refused. He asked Laust if he dislikes the idea of living with Narcina, but that's not true at all. She's the one who gave him hope when he was at the lowest point in his life, and she even came all the way to the city just to form a party with him, so he could never hate her. But Sieg can tell that Laust is still too embarrassed to admit that he likes her. Back to Lyra and Narcina's conversation, Lyra starts talking about her romantic history, and how when she lived in the royal capital, several men were trying to earn her affection. So much so that they would join her party just to get closer. Sieg was one of these guys, and one day while he wasn't around, another guy tried getting frisky with Lyra completely unprompted, but she refused to let it happen, so she knocked him out and dragged him outside. She was willing to let it go, but when Sieg found out forgiveness wasn't an option, so he kicked the guy out of the city, and then he vanished from the city as well. Lyra has no idea what Sieg was thinking at the time, but Sieg confides in Laust about the same story and explains that he was angry at himself for not being there to protect Lyra, so he didn't know how to face her. After he left the royal capital, a lot of time passed and Sieg ended up coming to the city for a mission, but he never could have expected that he would run into Lyra here, and to top it off, she was even willing to form a party with him after learning of his mission, even though she must have been angry at him. Although Lyra was never angry at him to begin with, she was just upset that he disappeared without talking to her at all. And since then, she's had no idea how Sieg feels about her. Just then, Sheila walks into the room and she says that if Lyra is this bothered by it, then she must have feelings for him. Downstairs, Sieg apologizes to Laust for making him listen to his story, but back to the initial topic, he asks Laust once more why he refused to live with Narcina when she asked him to. Laust isn't entirely against the idea, and in fact it made him happy when she said she wanted to live with him, but there is something he wanted to confirm before he made any decisions. Just then, Amherst shows up at the inn and she's been looking for Laust because she has prepared the investigative report he asked for. Sieg is a bit confused because he didn't think the guild offered private investigations, but Amherst isn't doing this because of the guild. Laust had personally asked her to do a little research for him, which is why she's here after hours. She asks Laust if it's alright for her to talk about this with someone else at the table, but Laust trusts Sieg, so he says it's fine for him to know, so Amherst begins her report on Narcina. Narcina is the only daughter of the Earl of Annalus Rocha, and normally Narcina and whomever she chose to marry would inherit the title from her father, but one day she suddenly said she wanted to become an adventurer. It isn't unheard of for a noble person to become an adventurer, but no parent would approve of their only child taking on such a dangerous job, so the Earl was initially against the idea. However, that all changed because one day Narcina woke up and her hair had randomly turned blue. The main reason Laust didn't recognize her at first was because of her different hair color, and while he knew it changed, he never expected that it all changed overnight. The cause of Narcina's hair color change is still unknown, but when it happened, the Earl suddenly stopped objecting to Narcina's wish to become an adventurer. Laust wonders why the Earl would change his mind so abruptly, so Sieg theorizes that Narcina might soon die, so her father is trying to give her the freedom to enjoy herself before she dies. That's only a possibility, but Narcina is currently strong enough to punch a phoenix out of the sky, so she doesn't seem like she's going to be dying anytime soon. Regardless of the reason, the fact of the matter is that Narcina has her father's consent to be here, which is what Laust was worried about. He didn't want to doubt Narcina when she said she was allowed to come here, but there was always the chance that she was lying because she wanted to be close to him, so he had to make sure she had consent. After Amherst has been paid, as she leaves because she's not interested in this conversation, and once she's gone, Sieg asks Laust what his plan would have been if he discovered that Narcina's father objected to her adventurer status. First off, Laust would have told her to go home temporarily to try and convince her parents properly, but even if that didn't work, he would still offer Narcina as much help as necessary, although it seems like he won't have to worry about that now. The girls upstairs are laying all the facts out, and basically Narcina is the daughter of an earl, yet she trained incredibly hard, drop everything to come here when she found out that Laust got kicked out of his party, and to top it off, she boldly asked him to live with her. They're all really impressed with how proactive Narcina is with her romantic pursuit, and Lyra wishes she could do the same, so the girls come up with a plan to make that happen. They take Lyra downstairs and force her to confess her feelings to Sieg. She asks him if they can have a private chat outside. Sieg doesn't know what's going on, but he can see that she's serious about this, so he agrees to go with her, and while they are outside, she works up the courage to ask Sieg to be her partner. Sieg doesn't see what the big deal is since they are already a part of the same party, but that's not what Lyra meant. She clarifies that she is talking about being partners for life, and when she says this, it finally dawns on Sieg that she's talking about a romantic partnership. All the girls are eagerly spying on the conversation from the door to see what Sieg says, but he's too flustered to give an answer right now, so he tells her he will think about it. Lyra isn't satisfied with this because she has poured her heart out, and all Sieg could say is that he will think about it. But then again, Sieg has never been the type of guy to plan ahead for this sort of thing, so she understands why he would want time to think about it, and she's willing to wait. The girls are all glad that things worked out between those two, but then Laust turns to Narcina and asks her if she has time to talk with him tomorrow, because there's something important he wants to tell her. The story continues. We see down in the labyrinth, a group of rookie adventurers have been cornered by an orc on the upper floors, and they have no chance of beating it, so they all try to hide until it leaves the area. Luckily, the orc doesn't notice them as it passes, but when everyone tries to make it to the exit, another orc shows up and blocks their path. To make things worse, the first orc is also doubling back, so in no time the group is going to be trapped on both sides. If they don't do something quickly, but not to worry because the leader of the group planned for a situation like this to make sure everyone survives, which is why he brought Keith. But as for poor Keith, yeah, he's not making it out of this one because they're using him as bait to lure the orcs while they escape. Meanwhile, in town, Laust and the others are having breakfast together, but Narcina is so lost in thought that she can barely focus on her food. Sieg and Lyra are starting to get worried about her, and they assume she's acting this way because Laust said he had something important to tell her, but he never told her what it's about or when they would have this conversation. So she's constantly daydreaming about what might be. Lyra tells Laust he should probably hurry up and have that discussion with Narcina, but Laust doesn't want to rush into it because it's a very serious matter. However, if he doesn't get it over with soon, Narcina is going to start eating flowers at some point, so he decides to have that talk after all. He goes over to Narcina, and as soon as he calls her name she nervously jumps up and asks what he needs. Laust tells her that he wants to have that discussion they talked about earlier, and Narcina is eagerly waiting what Laust has to say. But before he could actually say anything, the door to the inn swings open and somehow Keith managed to survive being abandoned in the labyrinth. Sheila seems to know who he is, and she's really worried about him, so she runs over and checks on him and his injuries. A little while later, Laust is fine healing Keith, so he tells everyone that the kid is going to be alright since his injuries weren't as bad as they looked. For now, Lyra and Sheila are going to be looking after them. The others are a bit confused to hear this because it makes sense for Lyra to look after him since she's a healer, but why does Sheila need to be there? Mary comes over and explains that Sheila has been friends with Keith since they were little. Keith is a labyrinth orphan and he's the same age as Sheila, so Mary couldn't just abandon him, which is why she'd often let him hang out and eat with them. She grew fond of him, so she would have happily let him work at the inn, but Keith wanted to become an adventurer, so she let him follow his dreams. He even looked so happy when he told her he got accepted into his first party. But look at how that turned out for him. Laust apologizes to Narcina, but he's going to have to talk to her later because there's something he needs to take care of first. Laust already called and if favored to help track down the people that ditched Keith in the labyrinth, and the guild members have already beaten them up pretty badly for what they did. They offered to let Laust decide the punishment for the treacherous party, but Laust thinks they've been beaten badly enough already. So he tells everyone to cut the party loose. but he makes it clear that he never wants to see the party anywhere near the city again, so the party runs off. Amherst understands why Loust asks for everyone's help to punish that party, but disputes between adventurers are meant to be handled by the guild, so she can't condone them taking actions into their own hands. The adventurers are enraged to hear that since the guild did absolutely nothing to stop those people from abandoning Keith in the first place, and it's not like they were taking any other actions to get justice. Amherst admits that the guild's response to these kinds of situations is pretty lacking, but she has orders from management that she has to follow. Just then, Hansam shows up and starts scolding the adventurers for daring to take matters into their own hands and banish that party. He tells them they had no right to do that, but the adventurers clap back and yell that Hansam has no right to say that to them when he did literally nothing to solve the problem. But Loust tells everyone to calm down and says he will talk to Hansam to air out their grievances. Once Loust meets with Hansam, he explains everything that happened, and while Hansam still isn't pleased that the adventurers handle it by themselves, now that he knows the full story, he understands why they did it. Loust asks him why he doesn't do anything to prevent these kinds of situations, because other cities at least have policies in place to protect labyrinth orphans from being treated as bait. But Hansam counters with the simple question, and asks if any of those policies would be enforceable down in the labyrinth. Cities can make all the fancy rules and regulations they want, but if it doesn't result in any beneficial changes, then there's no point in wasting time and money on it. Loust asks if Hansam intends to just abandon all the labyrinth orphans that end up getting used as bait, but he tells Loust he is mistaken about something. Hansam has always made it clear that anyone who doesn't like the way the city operates should leave. And that's not just because he doesn't like complainers. It's because he believes people should only become adventurers if they can handle it. This may be an adventurer's guild, but they never once forced anyone to become an adventurer, and the same goes for Keith, since if he can't handle the risks that come with the job, he should have chosen a different path in life. Loust wants to tell him he's wrong, but he kind of agrees with Hansam about that. However, he still believes that there must be some way to deal with the situation and save the labyrinth orphans. Hansam gets up and recalls something that a man once said, as an adventurer the incompetent are as good as dead, so it's best to be prepared from the start. Loust should remember those words because Hansam was the one who said that to him years ago. And to jog his memory, Hansam shows Loust the scar he got from their time together. Years ago, when Loust was still starting out as an adventurer, he and Hansam got suckered into being the luggage carriers for a party of adventurers, and Hansam was being treated particularly poorly. So Loust offered to help him carry some on his luggage to lighten Hansam's load. However, Hansam refused to accept any pity from someone as incompetent as Loust, so he told him to shut up and stop talking to him. Later that night, while the rest of the party was staying warm near the fire, Hansam's sitting out in the cold on his own away, and he is really regretting his choice to accept this job, even if it paid decent money. A few hours later, when everyone has gone to bed, Loust wakes Hansam up and warns him that there are a bunch of goblins approaching them. He tells Hansam to warn the others while he keeps watch a little longer, and Hansam does as he is instructed. So once everyone is up, Loust fills them in on the situation. The others can't believe it, so they ask Loust if he's sure about what he saw. But there's no doubt in Loust's mind that there are goblins approaching, and there are too many of them to even count. Once the group sees it for themselves, they are in shock because there's no way they can defeat a horde of goblins that large. Their best chance at surviving is if they run away, but the group leader thinks it will be too risky to run away like this. So to buy some time, he and the others in the party decide to use Loust and Hansam as bait to distract the goblins while they escape. Before Hansam realizes what's going on, both he and Loust have been chucked off the side of the cliff and left behind. Hansam tries to call out for help, but Loust tells him that those guys won't be helping them. In fact, this might be the reason the party decided to accept incompetent people like them in the first place. The situation infuriates Hansam, but he can't do anything about it until they get out of here. So he and Loust promise to make it out of this alive with one another and get their revenge on that party for abandoning them. The two battle against the goblins for a long time, but ultimately, there's not much they can do to defeat such a large horde, and there's only two of them, so they are forced to hide in a hollow tree to avoid the goblins for a little while. Hansam is starting to feel like there's no hope of surviving the goblin horde after all, and he can't stand the fact that the other party members are going to survive by sacrificing him. About that, not many people know this, but goblin hordes actually tend to prefer attacking larger groups of people, so if the goblins locate the party, they'll redirect all their forces to attack them. Just as Loust says this, the goblins locate the party and all start running off to attack them. And while the party is being massacred, Loust and Hansam are able to sneak out of their hiding spot undetected. Hansam thinks those guys deserve to die at the hands of the goblins after what they did to him and Laust, but Laust still wishes he could help them since he doesn't like the idea of anyone dying, although it's not like he has the power to save them, so he tells Hansam they should start heading back town. Hansam is about to start following Laust, but all of a sudden he falls to the ground in pain because he has a severe injury on his arm from when he fought the goblin. Laust is shocked and asked why Hansam didn't tell him about this sooner, but Hansam didn't want to make himself a burden when they were in a life or death situation. Laust begins trying to heal Hansam, but Hansam tells him to stop because he's going to attract the attention of the goblins if he keeps this up. He tells Laust to just leave him behind because this is his own fault for being incompetent, so weakling like him has no right to live. Laust yells that he's wrong and tells him that while the world may be harsh on incompetent people like them, there's so always hope for salvation. After that, Laust and Hansam worked together and broke through the goblins' defense lines to make it back to the city. In Hansam's eyes, Laust was his salvation, but what Laust said about the world being harsh on incompetent people was still true. The only difference is that the incompetent ones on that day were the adventurers who abandoned them without knowing the behavior patterns of the goblins they were fleeing from. After Laust and Hansam returned to the city, they went their separate ways, and Hansam had a certain elder who took him in. Hansam learned a lot of things from this person, and eventually he was able to stand on his own feet as a competent adventurer. The elder who took him in as the guild master missed, and that explains how Hansam became a guild employee and is acting as the guild master's right-hand man. But Hansam didn't say all this just because he wants to reminisce about the old days. He is greatly indebted to Laust for saving him on that day, so he wants to return the favor. He tells Laust to leave the city for his own good, and he's not saying this as a threat, but as a genuine warning because he doesn't want Laust to get caught up in what's about to come. Laust doesn't really understand what Hansam is trying to say, so as he leaves Hansam's office, he returns to the other adventurers and tells them that he couldn't get Hansam to budge on his policies. Just then, Amherst pulls him aside and tells Laust that there are actually a lot of people here who don't agree with the way the guildmaster is running things here, which is why she has a personal request for him. Later that day, Laust goes to Narcina and talks to her about the request Amherst gave him. Apparently, there have been a lot of monsters appearing on the roads near the city, so she asked Laust to take care of it before there are any civilian casualties as a result. Narcina understands, but she wonders why the guild hasn't put out a bounty for those monsters. But something like that would require Hansam to sign off on it, and he's not going to do that. There's also the issue of the criminal adventurers all over the city, so Laust offers to help deal with that as well. Narcina understands that Laust is doing a good thing, but it sounds like an awful lot of extra work for them. Laust tells her she doesn't need to worry about that since Amherst said she would give them bonus pay for dealing with the monsters on the road. But since this isn't a guild-approved mission, she's going to be paying the reward out of her own pocket. She really doesn't want to, but she feels like it's only fair since Laust is going out of his way to help. Later that day, Hansam goes to meet with the guild master and brings him a letter that arrived from the Prime Minister. The letter is basically a reminder from the Prime Minister for the guild to keep an eye on Narcina. But Hansam doesn't understand why Narcina would be important enough for the Prime Minister of the land to be so interested in her. He asked Miss for an explanation, so Miss tells him about the story of the evil dragon and the sleeping princess is a popular fairy tale in this world, where the princess sacrifices herself to defeat the evil dragon, but Miss tells Hansam that it is not a mere story. It is a prophecy that must be fulfilled and the sign that someone has been chosen by the gods to sacrifice themselves, as the sleeping princess is the sudden manifestation of blue hair, a description that perfectly matches Narcina. The story continues. We see our group heads out to the plains and soon spot the horde of goblins that have been attacking travelers in the area. Lyra suggests that they could sneak up and ambush the goblins or attack them from a distance, but Laust thinks the best course of action would be to attack them directly. If they attack from a distance, it will be easier for some goblins to survive and escape, and then they would just attack again sometime in the future. But if they fight head-on, they can make sure they wipe every single goblin out. In that case, Sieg suggests that they should circle around the goblins and attack them from the front, so everyone agrees and start walking across the field. By coincidence, this happens to be the same place where Laust and Narcina first met all those years ago. But unlike back when the horde of goblins attacked, Narcina isn't a helpless princess anymore and Laust is now a capable fighter, and they've both got each other's backs. After fighting for a while, all the goblins have been defeated and the group was getting ready to head back to town, but all of a sudden the ground begins violently shaking both in the plains and within the city, and it looks like the guildmaster knows something about this. Once the shaking finally stops, Loust and the others rush back to town to check if Mary is alright, and thankfully, no one was injured and there wasn't much damage to the inn. But that doesn't mean everything is fine though, because the second later, an adventurer comes running in and he says he's looking for Loust because Marnell needs his help in the town square. Loust and the others head over to the town square to see what the problem is, and when they get there, Marnell is relieved to see that Loust actually showed up. He points to the fields outside the city, and even though Loust and the other just finished dealing the huge horde of goblins, there's somehow an even bigger horde of goblins outside there. There are even a few hobgoblins mixed in there, so if those goblins were to attack the town right now after all the chaos from the earthquake, it would lead to an absolute massacre. Marnell doesn't want to let that happen, which is why he wants to take the goblin out before they make it to the city, and he would like Loust to help out. However, he hasn't reported this to the guild yet, so it is likely it won't get paid for their work. But Loust and the others say they are fine with that as long as the town remains safe. They all head out together and begin slaying the goblins one after another, and when Loust goes up against the hobgoblin, he manages to slice his arm off in one go. However, to his utter shock, the hobgoblin starts hurling death threat to him, and the regular goblins start doing the same. Everyone is freaked out because as far as they know, goblins are meant to be able to talk, and this is the first time they've ever seen something like this. But nevertheless, the goblins' strange behavior doesn't change their mission, so Loust tells everyone to stay focused on slaying the goblins as quickly as possible. Eventually they manage to defeat all the goblins, and the only one left is the injured hobgoblin. But before it vanishes like the rest of them, it proclaims that even though the humans manage to win this battle, it's sure they will lose in the end, because after what's coming, not a single human will be left alive. After the hobgoblin vanishes, it drops its magic crystal, and from the structure of the crystal, it looks like it was an evolved hobgoblin, but even so, Loust has never heard of an evolution granting a monster the ability to speak, so he is still unsure of what could have caused it. Just then, one of Marnell's friends comes running up and tells them that there's more trouble over by the labyrinth entrance. There are a ton of goblins gathered outside the entrance, at least 3 times the amount of those they fought outside the city, and their numbers are increasing by the minute. There's no way they could possibly handle all these goblins at once, so Loust tells everyone that the best course of action is to retreat for now, but that doesn't mean they are running away, because Loust plans to head to the guild and gather more adventurers to help defeat the goblins, or at least that was the plan. But when they get to the guild, it looks like every adventurer in town is already getting ready to go fight the goblins, and they seem unusually enthusiastic about it. The reason the adventurers are so motivated is because the guild put out a bounty on the goblins that escaped the labyrinth. It's quite a generous amount at that. Part of the bounds he is even paid in advance, so there are a bunch of adventurers who just end up taking the money and disappear to buy some non-existent milk. Narcina asks why they keep giving out advance payments if they know people like that are going to take advantage of it, and Amherst would personally like to stop wasting money. But it's an order from Hansam, so she has no choice but to go along with it. Marnell doesn't think this is such a bad thing, because regardless of their selfish motivations, if all these adventurers go to fight the goblins, the town will be saved. However, Sieg wonders if Hansam might have known something like this would happen, since all the money they are giving out as rewards would have had to have been gathered weeks in advance. Just then, Ralma shows up, and Loust is surprised to see that she's still in town. But since she's here, he asked if she expected something like this to happen as well. For such a large number of goblins to escape the labyrinth at once, there could only be one possible explanation: a labyrinth rampage. Narcina doesn't know what a labyrinth rampage is, but Amherst recalls reading about it in an old book, so she leads everyone into the back to take a look at. A labyrinth rampage is a phenomenon where countless monsters emerge from the labyrinth at once, and while it usually only lasts one day, there have been reports of rampages lasting up to a week, and in a case like that, any nearby cities or villages would be overwhelmed monsters and eventually become ruins. The rampage is caused when the ambient magic in the labyrinth exceeds a certain level, and the only way to prevent it is to continuously slay all the monsters in there, while also allowing the new monsters to spawn in the labyrinth to absorb some of that magic. Now that Amherst thinks about it, she recalls that the whole reason the Adventurers Guild was created in the first place was to ensure that the magic levels in the labyrinth are kept at a reasonable level. That's really useful information, so the others are a bit upset that Amherst didn't mention it till now, but her defense was only mentioned once during guild staff orientation, and no one pays attention to that. Ralma doesn't blame Amherst for not taking that part of their orientation seriously, since the last time a labyrinth rampage actually happened was over 100 years ago, but then again, 100 years isn't that long when we're talking about a disaster like a dungeon rampage. It is still recent enough for there to be well-documented reports about it. so anyone who's been in the adventurer business for a while should have heard about it. Marnell finds it strange that even though Mardat is one of the largest adventurer cities out there, it wasn't able to slay enough monsters to keep the magic levels in check. It's almost as if this rampage was intentionally caused, but speculation won't get them anywhere right now since the rampage is already in progress, so Rauma asks Laust what he wants to do about it. A little while later, Laust and a couple of others are helping the people in the area move all their stuff out. But Narcina asks if all this is really necessary. Laust doesn't like the idea of using other people's stuff either. But if the rampage ends up lasting several days, then no matter how hard the adventurers tried, there's no way they will be able to last long enough. Inevitably, the city is going to suffer damages, so the best they can do is get ready and create a barricade with all this stuff to minimize that damage. Down the road, Marnell is yelling at Keith and the other kids for trying to go fight the goblins as well. Keith and the others think it's the right thing to do since this place is their hometown and they want to fight to defend it. But in all honesty, Keith and the others would probably die the second they set foot on that battlefield, so Marnell won't let them go. He tells them that they can fight for their home in the future when they are more competent as adventurers, but getting themselves killed won't do anyone any good. So if they really want to help, Marnell suggests that they should play support roles for the adventurers engaged in combat. Things like transporting injured people or sending messages back and forth will help the fight go smoother in the long run. Keith and the others understand what he's saying, so they all agree to support the adventurers and run off to get started. A little while later, the goblins show up the city entrance and the adventurers are all posted outside to intercept them. So as the battle begins, they seal off the entrance with some carts and begin attacking the goblins inside. It is an intense battle as there are even mid-level monsters showing up. And Laust hadn't expected the monsters to show up in just half a day, so he blames himself for being unprepared. However, Rauma assures him that it's not his fault since along with everyone else, this is Laust's first time experiencing a labyrinth rampage. So no one expects him to be fully prepared, but if he still feels guilty about it then he's just going to have to fight with all his heart to make sure everyone survives. Aside from the goblins there are also 2 liches floating in the air, and these ones can talk as well, so they start yelling that they will kill all the humans, but Rauma isn't interested in hearing their chant, so she starts shooting fireballs at the monsters and Marnell orders everyone to attack at once. With their combined effort, they're able to take out every monster in the initial wave. But just when Rauma thought they were done, the second wave of monsters showed up and attacked. Narcina asked her Rauma if she can blow them up with another fireball, but Rauma is exhausted, so she isn't going to be able to help for a while. If that's the case, Sieg decides to handle the monsters instead, and since Lyra is taking care of the healing, Laust decides to join him as well. They both do their best to take on the goblins and they are holding their ground pretty well, but then Sieg accidentally trips on one of the goblins' clubs so his defenses are left wide open and the goblin is about to use the opportunity to smash his head in. But the last second, Sieg's master Ronaldo dashes in to save him. This is our first time seeing Ronaldo, but he's the one who trained Sieg and gifted him that magic sword he's always using. However, Sieg isn't the only one who has a history with Ronaldo here because Laust and Narcina and Rauma all know him as well. Ronaldo was the one who taught Laust how to use a sword and for a while he also acted as a Narcina's personal swordsmanship teacher, although she ended up deciding to go with martial arts instead. He's also old friends with Rauma, so he jokes about her being a fire demon, and that gets Rauma angry so she launches a fire blast at him. Ronaldo is easily able to deflect it though, and there's a lot he'd like to say to Rauma, but it looks like there are more important matters to deal with at the moment, so he runs off to deal with the goblins. While Ronaldo is dealing with that, a magic door suddenly opens on the side of a building and Hansam walks out telling Rauma that Branch President Mist wants to see her. Rauma is a little suspicious about this whole thing, but she agrees to go see Mist. Before she leaves though, Laust asks if he can come along since there's a lot he wants to say to Mist in person. Surprisingly, Hansam says it's fine for Laust to accompany them and even says Narcina should come as well. Hansam starts leading them to Mist's chambers and Narcina doesn't understand why Mist would want to see her, but Laust tells her everything's going to be fine. Worst case scenario, if Mist tries to do anything, Laust will be there to protect her. However, Rauma corrects Laust because he has no chance in hell of beating Mist in a fight. Mist is even stronger than Rauma is, so she warns Laust and not to attack him under any circumstances. But with that said, the second Rauma sees Mist she launches a massive fireball at his face. Of course, Mist remains completely unharmed, but he scolds Rauma for being so reckless because she nearly burned his precious clothes. This is the guild branch president Mist and he's the last elf alive in this world. The story continues. We see Laust and Narcina are still in shock after learning that someone as powerful as Rauma has a mastered, so Rauma explains that Mist is leaves above her every way. Elves as a species are extremely proficient in the use of magic, but even among elves Mist is exceptionally powerful since has lived for over 600 years and learned all kinds of spells. This whole time Mist has been staring intently at Narcina. It's starting to make her a little, so Rauma asks Mist why he summoned them here. It has been years since she last saw him, and after she found out he was in this town he kept avoiding her up till now, so she assumes this isn't meant to be a reunion. Indeed, Mist has something important to tell them, but it's going to be a long story, so he uses magic to conjure up some chairs so everyone can sit. Before they begin, Rauma asks Mist if this was his plan all along. He lures scumbag adventurers into the city and refused to do anything about their criminal conduct because he intended to have them fight the rampage. And the reason Hansam kept telling people to leave town over the smallest complaint was an attempt to allow the kind adventurers to stay of trouble. All this leads to the conclusion that Mist must have known about the rampage long before it happened, and Mist doesn't deny it since anyone could have figured out that rampage was coming with all the strange things happening in there. Strong monsters have begun showing up on the upper levels, and on top of that, there was an unusually high evolution rate among the monsters. So there were clear signs, but if Mist really knew about it in advance, Narcina asked why he didn't at least warn the people about it ahead of time. Hansam cuts are often says warning the people would have done nothing to help. They knew a rampage was coming, but they had no idea if it would come in a day, a week, or 10 years, and issuing a warning with no clear time frame would make no difference to their defenses. Even so, it wouldn't make any sense to hide the possibility of such a defeating event occurring, so Rauma assumes there must be some hidden reasons why Mist didn't tell anyone about the rampage. Rauma thinks Mist must have caused the rampage, but even if Mist could control the labyrinth, he wouldn't bother creating so much trouble for himself. He explains that the order to keep the rampage a secret came from his boss, the supervisor of every adventurer's guild in the country. Basically, even though rampages are known to last for several days and could destroy several cities, since the rampage isn't happening anywhere near the royal capital, the higher-ups didn't see it as a threat and decided it would be better to keep it a secret so as to not throw the country into chaos. But that means Mardat and the cities nearby are being sacrificed, which is why Mist took matters into his own hands and set up personal countermeasures against the rampage. Laust and Narcina are asked if they remember all the towers that were constructed across town, because those are likely part of the last resort contingency plan that Mist made. However, before that he wants to do everything he can to defend the city, so he asks that Rauma step up and help hold off the monsters. No matter how energetic the adventurers outside are, they will eventually get exhausted and will need to take a break. But the countermeasure Mist created requires an incredibly large amount of mana to function, so he needs Rauma to power it. Given the circumstances, Rauma agrees to go back out and act as a battery, but if Mist is asking her to put her life on the line so casually, she asks if he is willing to do the same. Mist confirms this, and he's going to be doing everything within his power to stop the rampage, which is why he and Hansam will be going to the lowest floor of the labyrinth. Narcina is surprised to hear this since she recalls that the bottom of the labyrinth hasn't been found yet, and while that may be true, thanks to a bunch of reports, Mist has been able to pinpoint the final boss's general location. Laust thinks a mission like this is way too risky, but if he and Hansam manage to defeat the Labyrinth Master, then the mana supply that's causing the rampage will be cut off, leading in the rampage will end sooner. After hearing what they had planned, Rauma agrees to do her best to hold off the rampage until he can defeat the Labyrinth Master. Outside, the situation with the rampage hasn't gotten much better, but thanks to the effort of Ronaldo and to a lesser extent Sieg, they have managed to keep the monsters from breaking into the city. But then a lot half-orcs start showing up and Sieg is worried about them breaking through the blockade. So he was up front and asked Ronaldo to charge at the orcs with him. While the two of them continue fighting, Rauma and the others are brought to the guild courtyard and told to proceed as planned. Rauma finds the device Mist was talking about, places her hand on it to open a door inside. She then gives Laust a warning because even if they're working with Mist for now, he isn't someone who could be trusted. So Laust means to be careful about him while she's gone. Rauma then says goodbye to Laust before walking into the device and closing the door behind her. The device then powers on and a blinding light begins pouring out of it as a massive barrier is formed all around the city. The adventurers by the gate have no idea what's going on with the barrier, but they start using it to their advantage and begin run back in for safety. Thankfully, it seems like the orc won't be able to break through anytime soon, so they decide to go handle the monsters they get before the barrier came up. Meanwhile, Sieg and Ronaldo have just finished dealing with the last orc, so Ronaldo tells Sieg to take a break. Sieg says he can still keep fighting, but Ronaldo can tell that Sieg is out of breath and if he's tired he won't be able to fight effectively. Plus there are plenty of other people, so they should be able to handle the remaining monsters on our own. That's only because this mysterious wall is keeping the monsters out. Just then, Laust and Narcina show up and they fill everyone in on the details of what happened and how Ralma is risking her life to keep this barrier up. The barrier is made up of Ralma's magic power, but for the barrier to cover an area this large it must be consuming a lot of mana, and even if Ralma may have a large mana pool, it is still limited, so she will eventually run out at some point. Normally, if a person runs out of mana, they simply end up passing out from mana exhaustion. But the device Ralma is in forcibly sucks mana out of her body, so as long as the magic barrier is still needed, even if she passed out the device will continue draining magic from her body until she ends up dead. Another monster appears, this time it's a griffin, which is superpower. Under normal circumstances, even with the combined effort of every adventurer here, they wouldn't be able to defeat a single griffin, but thankfully they don't have to fight it since the barrier prevents it from getting into the city. However, its presence is still going to a problem. The barrier is made from elf technology, so it won't be breached by the attacks from the griffin, but the more damage the barrier takes, the more mana it will need to drain from Ralma to repair itself. If they let it continue attacking the barrier like that, then it won't be long before Ralma dies from mana depletion. Laust refuses to let that happen, so he starts leading to fight the griffin, but before he goes, Ronaldo stops him and says he doesn't have to do it alone. They're all the team here and Ralma is important to them, so they'll do whatever it takes to make sure she survives. The group runs out of the barrier and towards the horde of goblins and orcs, but the main threat right now is the griffin that repeatedly striking the barrier, so Ronaldo tells everyone to deal with the orcs quickly so they can focus their attention on the griffin. The group starts laying waste to the small fry monsters on the ground, but all of a sudden, the remaining goblins start backing off because they've realized they have no chance of winning. Thus, they called a Fenrir for backup. Narcina has never seen a Fenrir before, but she can already tell that that thing is incredibly strong, and Laust confirms it. The Fenrir has a lightning-fast dash, and while on the ground it possesses strength equal to that of a griffin, so it won't be easy to beat it. Ronaldo asks Laust if he will be able to handle the Fenrir on his own since he still has to take down the griffin, and Laust thinks he should be able to manage it. So Ronaldo runs off to handle the griffin while the rest of them take on the Fenrir. Armia that is the first to attack and launches a fireball at the Fenrir, but she wasn't expecting it to be so fast, so she gets caught off guard as the Fenrir charges at her. Luckily, Laust was quick enough to keep up with it, so he jumps in front of Armia and parries the Fenrir's attacks. Everyone is amazed that Laust is capable of keeping up with Fenrir's speed on his own, but even so Laust is still losing the only thing Laust has been able to do so far as defend himself. So the Fenrir eventually catches Laust lacking and slashes his arm. Laust is in no condition to fight back anymore, so Sieg steps up to keep the Fenrir busy with Armia until Lyra and Narcina can treat Laust's injury. Laust tries telling Narcina he's okay, but that's clearly not true. Lyra says his arm is barely hanging on by a thread. She's going to be able to heal him, but it'll take a while, so Laust needs to sit still for a bit. Meanwhile, as the griffin was flying in to once again attack the barrier, it finds Ronaldo perched atop the tower, and before the griffin even reached barrier, Ronaldo jumps off and slams it into the ground. The griffin is still alive, but Ronaldo injured his wing pretty badly, so won't be able to fly for a while, and that makes it a lot easier for Ronaldo to take it down. Meanwhile, Sieg and Armia are doing a good job keeping the Fenrir busy, but the Fenrir is smart enough to realize that Armia is an easier target than Sieg, so it howls and calls a lich to take her out. Armia isn't able to react in time, so she gets knocked out, and Armia being hurt distracts Sieg so much that the Fenrir is able to knock him down immediately. However, the Fenrir's real target is Laust, so it doesn't finish Sieg off and instead runs to stop Lyra from healing Laust before grabbing him and tossing Laust's unconscious body around. Narcina is enraged that the Fenrir would dare to hurt her dear Laust, so if she charges at the Fenrir and yells that she's going to make it pay for what is done. All things considered, Narcina is doing pretty well against the Fenrir and even manages to knock it away with a powerful kick at one point. But the Fenrir gets back up and starts attacking her with full force until it eventually slashes her arm and causes Narcina to collapse to the ground. The Fenrir then triumphantly stands over Narcina's body thinking it his own, but that's when she reveals that she was just acting as bait this entire time, and in the next moment Laust jumps up from behind the Fenrir and stabs it in the neck with his dagger. When Narcina saw Laust on the floor earlier, she noticed that he was only pretending to be unconscious and was really healing his arm. So she decides to draw the Fenrir's attention so it would lose focus on Laust and would be susceptible to a surprise attack. Now the Fenrir has been defeated, Narcina's injuries cause her to pass out, so by the time she wakes up the others have already brought her back inside the barrier. She's surprised that her body doesn't hurt anymore, but with Laust around it would honestly be more surprising if he hadn't healed her. Narcina knows that the Fenrir was taken care of, but she asked what happened to the griffin. So Ronaldo pulls out the griffin's magic gem and says he killed it. And now that the major threats have been taken care of, Ralma should be able to survive a little while longer. But if they want to ensure that she lives past this, they have to hope that Mist really does take down the Labyrinth Master and Hansam actually take out the Labrador Master like they said they would. However, there's nothing they can do about it for now, so Laust suggests they should all head back to the inn and rest up. But all of a sudden, Hansam appears behind Narcina and he seems disappointed that Narcina is still alive since he had intended for her to die in battle today. So he pulls her into a portal so he can finish the job himself. The story continues. We see Marnell and the other adventurers have just finished dealing with the last few monsters that were in the town, so as long as this barrier holds up, everyone should be safe now. Keith and the other kids come over to deliver some food to the adventurers and tell them to take a break, now that the town is safe and Marnell appreciates it. But he is too worried about Laust and the others to relax right now. However, Sheila tells him that Laust is already back at the inn resting. Marnell was glad to hear this and asks if that means everyone made it out alright. But unfortunately, while Laust and the others made it back, Narcina wasn't so lucky. Back at the inn, the group is trying to plan out their next move and figure out why Hansam kidnapped Narcina, but Ronaldo believes it's because Narcina is the sleeping princess. Armia finds it hard to believe since she thought the story of the sleeping princess was just a fairy tale. But some of the details may have been exaggerated. The story is based on real events. The story says that the sleeping princess has the power to put the evil dragon to sleep by sacrificing herself. So Narcina was likely kidnapped, so she could be fetched to the dragon. Meanwhile, Hansam returns to Mist's ruin with Narcina, and Mist compliments Hansam for doing such a good job. But the second Narcina realizes Mist is the one behind her kidnapping, she leads forward to attack him. Unfortunately, Mist has lived long enough to become a Jedi, so he uses the Force to stop Narcina mid-air and bring her down to her knees. Narcina asks him what he intends to do with her, but Mist doesn't give her a direct answer and instead asks if she has heard about the evil dragon. Narcina thinks Mist is mocking her since everyone in this world has heard about the evil dragon, but Mist is serious, so he releases her and asks her to explain what she knows. Narcina talks about how the evil dragon is a terrifying creature that appeared 200 years ago, but a hero suddenly appeared and defeated it. Mist tells her she's mostly correct, but she's missing a few important details. First of all, the hero wasn't actually able to kill the dragon. All he managed to do was send it to where it came from, and the dragon didn't only show up 200 years ago, it also showed up 400, 600 and 800 years ago as well. The cycle of the dragon's appearance repeats every 200 years, and each time so far the dragon has been defeated by a hero and forced to retreat until it recovers its strength and attacks again, and this is exactly 200 years since the last time the dragon was defeated, so it will be appearing soon. Narcina realizes this is bad news, so she asks if the hero can stop the dragon again this time. But unfortunately, Mist tells her that won't happen. Normally, the hero appears at the same time as the dragon's revival, but so far there has been no sign of any hero. However, even if there's no hero right now and there is still someone who put the dragon to sleep, and that person is Narcina. The fact that her hair is blue is all the proof they need to figure out that she is the sleeping princess, since when Maiden is chosen, their hair will suddenly turn blue. Narcina asked if her father knew about this, but it would be hard to imagine someone in a position of power like him would be oblivious to something so important, which is probably why he let Narcina become an adventurer in the first place. Back at the inn, Laust asked Ronaldo if Mist intends to use Narcina to put the dragon to sleep, but Ronaldo doesn't think Mist is the one who made the decision. The order most likely came from his boss, the Chancellor of the Adventurers Guild, and the only thing that man cares about is minimizing the damage caused by the dragon, no matter what it takes. Armia doesn't think that sounds so bad, but Ronaldo reiterates that the Chancellor is only interested in minimizing the damage caused by the dragon, not preventing it entire. For example, if he had to sacrifice 40 people so that 60 others would survive, he wouldn't hesitate. In fact, the reason this city has no walls is because the Chancellor didn't approve of having a wall built. When the dragon's return approaches, labyrinth stampedes are bound to occur, and the Chancellor was well aware of this, so he planned to let this town be destroyed by the stampede to send a message. If a city were completely destroyed, then everyone from the commoners to the king would realize the gravity of the situation, and the chancellor would be even full authority to do whatever it takes to defeat the dragon. Narcina can't believe that the chancellor is willing to let all the people of Mardat city die, but the chancellor believes this is the only way he can save the world. Each time the dragon shows up, it appears in a different labyrinth. But analyzing the ambient mana and labyrinth activity, that guild was able to deduce that the dragon would appear here, and they've known this for decades. Ronaldo tells the others the same thing, but if they've known that the dragon would show up here for so long, then Sieg doesn't understand why they didn't warn the townspeople of the imminent danger. It's clear that the chancellor intended to let all the people in the town die, but Mist wasn't on board with that idea, so he took desperate measures to construct a barrier around Mardat without the chancellor finding out. However, if the stampede doesn't end soon, and Rauma's life will be at risk, so Mist is likely going to do everything in his power to defeat the labyrinth boss as quickly as possible, but he also had Hansam kidnap Narcina as an insurance policy to stop the dragon in case he fails his mission. Of course, Ronaldo can't be sure of Mist's intentions without asking him personally, but it's going to be difficult to do that since they don't even know where it is. However, they do know that he is planning to defeat the labyrinth boss, so that must mean he is headed for the deepest part of the labyrinth, so they might be able to find him there. The labyrinth still hasn't been fully explored, so this is going to be a dangerous mission in unknown territory. And Ronaldo wants to make sure everybody is in agreement before they begin. Laust would naturally do whatever it takes to save Narcina, and the others care about her a lot as well, so they all agree to go save her. Down in Mist's office, Hansam and Narcina all step on the magic circle in the middle of the room and are teleported to a wide open area in the labyrinth. At the same time, Laust and the others have entered the labyrinth, and they are surprised to see that there are no monsters nearby. But that's because most of the monsters were forced out of the labyrinth by the stampede. However, it won't be long before new monsters start spawning, and so they need to hurry. Over on Narcina's end, as they walk through the labyrinth floor, they run into a giant cyclops, and monsters like that are extremely high level, so Narcina is wondering what kind of place is this that has monsters like that wandering around. Mist explains that this is the deepest floor of the labyrinth, and over there is the temple where the dungeon boss resides. Narcina is surprised to hear this since she thought this place hadn't been found yet, but that's just because Mist kept it a secret intentionally. Aside from Narcina, the only people who have ever been here are Mist and Hansam, and a guest Laust too, since he managed to track Narcina down here. As soon as he spots her, he calls out her name, but his yelling gets the attention of the Cyclops in the area, so the Cyclops stands in Laust's way and try to attack him. However, even though those Cyclopses are incredibly powerful, Laust is able to easily outpace them and cut one of the Cyclopses' arms off. He then proceeds to slay the remaining Cyclopses, all while his eyes glow red. But when the last Cyclops finally dies, he goes back to normal and turns to his friends to let them know he's alright. Laust then confronts Mist, but Mist seems oddly happy and tells Laust that he is glad he made it here in time. He then hands Narcina back over to him without a fight, so Laust asks him if he's trying to trick him or something. Mist tells Laust that he isn't in favor of the Chancellor's methods, so he wants to minimize casualties as much as possible. Ronaldo and Sieg don't believe him because he's still orchestrated plans that involve sacrificing Rauma, Narcina, and even the morally great adventurers. But Mist reminds them that no one has died yet, and if they can manage to defeat the labyrinth boss in time, no one will have to die. However, for this to work, he's going to need Laust to be the one to defeat the boss. Of course, Mist still intends to help as much as possible, but the elves are not favored by the gods. So this world belongs to the humans, and as such is only fitting that the world be saved by the hands of humans. Mist may be powerful, but he doesn't have much longer to live, so he tells them that they can't rely on him to win for them. Since there's no other choice, everyone agrees to fight the boss, but as they walk towards the temple, Lyra asks Sieg if it's really alright for them to trust the words of a man like Mist. Even Laust doesn't entirely trust Mist, but if what he says is true, then they should be able to save everyone by defeating the boss. Once they finally arrive in the boss temple, Mist turns to face the group and gives them a little more info about the dragon and the labyrinth stampede. When the hero defeats the dragon, is forced to go to sleep in a separate realm, and it takes a tremendous amount of magic to awaken the beast. But magic power is gathered by the monsters that run rampant in the labyrinth, at which point it is then the responsibility of the labyrinth boss to deliver the magic to the dragon so it can awaken. In other words, if they can defeat the labyrinth boss, it will stop bothering the stampede and the revival of Evil Dragon. But that won't solve the main problem here. Even if they cut off the dragon's mana supply here, it will simply try again using another labyrinth. But at the very least, defeating the boss here will buy them a decent amount of time to figure out what to do when the dragon eventually tries to awaken again. Mist walks up to Temple Gate and slams his staff into the ground to get the attention of the labyrinth boss, the Siren. Once it comes out, Mist tells everyone to attack it with everything they have, so they all charge at it. Armia uses a spell to bind the Siren in place, while Seek and Ronaldo both leap into the air and use their swords to cut off the Siren's wings. So far they are doing pretty well against it, but the Siren suddenly launches a barrage of blasts at the group in an attempt to stop them. However, Narcina jumps up and lands a devastating punch, which cracks the Siren's face and causes it to try and flee. But before it could get away, Laust appeared in front of it and sliced it in half, officially defeating the labyrinth boss. This should have been a great victory for them, but all of a sudden, Hansam gets stabbed through the back by Dark Tendril, and they hear the voice of the evil dragon come through the portal. It looks like the dragon had already acquired enough mana to allow him to partially manifest through that portal, and the dragon seems to recognize Mist since it has seen him several times before. It is infuriated that Mist is once again interfering with his plans, but this time it won't allow anything to stop it, so it demands that Mist surrender his body to it if he doesn't want to see Hansam die. Mist knows that if he gives up his body to the dragon would mean certain doom for the world. So as much as he hates the idea of it, he's going to have to let Hansam die, and then use all this power to seal the portal. However, Mist hesitates for a moment because he really doesn't want to let Hansam die, and that moment of hesitation was all it took for the dragon to forcefully take over his body. He begins using Mist's body as a medium to power the portal and transfer over all of his power. But there isn't enough mana in this labyrinth, so he teleports himself away to find a suitable power source. With the dragon gone, Hansam gets released and falls to the floor, so Laust rushes over to his side so he can heal the gaping hole in his chest. However, Hansam tells Laust to forget about healing him and go chase after the dragon because there's no telling what kind of damage it's going to do. Meanwhile, the dragon has just teleported to the outskirts of the city, and it wants to get in, so it begins using powerful magic to try and break the barrier, and it doesn't look like Ralma will be able to withstand much more damage. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.